Colin?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to session 3 of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative Annual Meeting. I'm Colin Wallenkamp, the Executive Director, coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri at the very capable, very expansive, very advanced worldwide technology tech auditorium here at their world headquarters. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon of day 2 for our annual meeting. We have an exciting lineup for this afternoon. Right off the bat, we're going to be talking about something that we don't think is critical infrastructure. Usually when we do, we're thinking of highways, bridges, transit system, rails, ports, transmission lines, water treatment facilities. But just as critical and just as valuable as those things are parks. Wouldn't normally consider it that way, but it's true. And we're going to go into how true it is and all the different co-benefits that they bring our cities at a very high level. It's a new renaissance and it's a new day for parks and Greenspace. And our keynote speaker knows that firsthand. But before then, just a few administrative details to work out and share with everybody, especially if you're just joining us for the first time. Our theme this year is redefining what river cities can do. And that theme is definitely going to translate into this afternoon's discussion. Brant, I will hand it over now to you to give our audience the pointers they need to participate and be actively engaged in the discussion.
Thank you, Colin. First of all, if you have any technical issues, feel free to directly message me through the chat function. We also have a Q&A function where you can ask questions of our panelists and other guests. If you'd like to be recognized to ask a more elaborate question, please just raise your hand and we'll be sure to do that. Back to you, Colin. Thank
you, Brant. I am excited to introduce the moderator for today's session. Small town, big mayor, big presence, and has big plans for his own park system, expanding it and meeting some particularly interesting challenges that he has to meet, juxtaposed between city, rail, waterfront. This is Chris Lane of Savannah, Illinois. Mayor Lane is a mover and shaker. He has brought new corporate advisory board members into MRCTI. He has worked to redefine manufacturing on the Mississippi River, and he has worked to really expand the opportunities of his town in the upper reaches of Illinois, with Iowa just on the other side of him. Mayor Lane, thank you so much for moderating today's discussion on parks, and I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Colin. Like Colin said, this is Mayor Chris Lane of Savannah, Illinois, and it is my pleasure to be moderating today's session on redefining city parks and green space. This is an important topic to the majority of our mayors, as we more and more treat parks and green space as critical infrastructure that brings multiple benefits. In fact, this session includes our annual meeting's keynote speaker. Tourism and outdoor recreation comprise the second largest economy on the Mississippi River, generating hundreds of millions in annual revenue, supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs. Our mayors see parks and recreation as one of the most critical drivers to economic development as well as resilience. Disaster impacts along the Mississippi River since 2005 have cost our communities north of $210 billion in actual losses. That's not even counting impacts from Hurricane Ida this month. Cities are turning to natural infrastructure as the centerpiece for an affordable resilience strategy, which has been a reoccurring concern throughout this meeting. Reflecting on this notion around parks, here in Savannah, we chose the benefits of parks years ago and have reaped those benefits. Our riverfront park is a prime example that cities both small and large can draw people to their communities if they focus on improving their parks. Here in Savannah, we are currently in the final stages of a very large riverfront park master plan. We are planning to turn unused space into a two-phase project, redeveloping those spaces into multi-use parks, adding to our already popular riverfront park. These phases include small projects like walking trails, pavilions, gardens, and a fishing dock to give both residents and visitors better access to the river. Phase 2 is a much bigger project and includes redeveloping our old sewer treatment area. This phase includes a band shelter, restrooms, parking, splash pad, playground, pavilions, beach, and a dog park. We have always valued our parks and what they bring to the city. But at this time in our history, we, like many of you, have seen that outdoor recreation has become so much more important to our economies. And by expanding our already great parks, we hope to not only attract more tourism, but also new residents to our city. I'm excited for this session because, like a lot of you probably, and as a smaller city ourselves, we struggle with the funding sources to get this paid for. So I hope to, along with you, learn a lot from today's session. Let's see, Mayor Carter of St. Paul, Minnesota was running a little bit late today, so I believe he is not on yet. So I think Brant will just skip over that portion and I will introduce Mr. Kelly. Is that correct? All right, so I am happy to introduce Michael P. Kelly, the chairman of the board for the National Recreation and Park Association, an association of more than 60,000 park and recreation professionals. Mr. Kelly is also general superintendent and CEO of the Chicago Park District. Appointed by Mayor Rahm Emanuel in 2011, Kelly is charged with the oversight of the $450 million urban park system that serves more than 41 million patrons annually. Under his leadership in 2014, the Chicago Park District was awarded the National Gold Medal Award for Excellence in Park and Recreation Management for the first time in the agency's history. Today, the Chicago Park District is comprised of 8,000 plus acres of open space, totaling more than 570 parks, 31 beaches, 50 nature areas, and 2 world-class conservatories. Please welcome Michael Kelly.
Thank you, Mayor. And I've got to update my bio. I think we're up to 605 parks. So thank you.
Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And it was really good to hear some of the talking points you guys hit on right away. First was that when you think of infrastructure, you don't always think of parks. A couple years ago at NRPA, we conducted a study at Penn State, and it was very much detailed that where cities see us is an important asset, and where they see us in funding. So parks poll at like 92, 95% approval rating. It's probably one of the highest approval ratings you'll find in any government service. But on funding, ever since the economic downturn, we're at the bottom. Only the arts and libraries are below us nationally. So it really hit home these anecdotal stories we always told folks and what we always sensed. So it's my job today to convince, not really you guys, because I think most of you know the importance of parks, but to build a voice amongst all of us as we at NRPA are trying to unite this very powerful voice and movement about the importance of green space and open space. I definitely will talk about economics. Here in Chicago, our waterfronts are pretty much the economic drivers, I would argue, to some extent. I'm gonna want to come up and do. I've got a PowerPoint I want to do, and while my deputy COO Beth Tomlins boots that up, I also want to introduce Elvis Cordova. Should be on the line. He's the vice president of public policy and advocacy for us at NRPA. So if I can just share my screen, Brant, I'll walk you guys through it, and then hopefully I left enough time for questions, because really that's fundamentally, anytime I talk about parks, it's the Q&A that I get the most jazz out of, to be honest with you. So, all right, this looks pretty good. So, okay. So I'm just going to start off, and I'm going to tell you something that seems so obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. You know, parks are essential. Parks are super important. And one thing you'll come away from this slideshow is pictures speak 1,000 words when you're in the park business. And that's important, because when you're lobbying for money and you're lobbying for support, who doesn't like to see kids? Who doesn't like to see athletics? Who doesn't like to see the arts? So we have a very good, any park in America has a very good illustration of what they're about and how to gather the resources. So parks are essential to people, parks are essential to the environment, and parks are essential to economic drivers. This is a shot of formerly Meigs Field, which is to the southeast of Soldier Field. You can see it in the background, but when you're out here on this site, if you don't see the high rises, and in some spots you can't, you feel like you're completely lost out in the meadows, out in the country, and not outside of Chicago's bustling downtown. But the important thing is, whether it's people, the environment, or the economy, you don't have to choose. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start from my national sort of perspective and then hone in more on my experiences is the head of the Chicago Park District. So first off, parks are essential, and they are at the forefront of emergency services here. And as you can gather, this is a COVID shot, I believe. But I've been with the Chicago Park District for 19 years, and I was with the city of Chicago for 8 years before that. And I can tell you, Chicago, like everyone else in the country, we're oftentimes the go-to when you need, you have an emergency, whether it's to provide meals. We were a big hub when schools were closed, as were many cities across the country. Like I said, vaccination and testing sites are really important. Emergency shelters, whether you're having a flood, a tornado, or another natural disaster, oftentimes we're the emergency shelters for there. We're always counted on for emergencies. Probably no bigger than Los Angeles. Los Angeles was asked to, their park system was asked to house almost their entire homeless population, which If you've been to LA, it's sizable. Onto the environment. So, we can actually provide a ton of environmental benefits at low cost and easily sustainable. We lower your ground temp, stormwater collection, obviously is a big one, air quality. And then of course, when we get involved, parks get involved and you work on habitat, it's good for insects and it's good for animals. As I mentioned before, again, parks are good for people. Bottom line is the science is there, the data is there. If you live near a park, if you're out in green space, your mental health is better, your physical health is better. And obviously the more you're moving and the more you're active, the better it is for your body and your mind. Parks now are in high demand. If COVID didn't highlight one thing, it definitely highlighted the importance of parks and how badly people needed to get out. We've done a lot of research at NRPA. 99% of US adults agree it's critical that their local government develops local parks, trails, and green spaces. 6 of 7 US adults support their local park and rec agency's environmental initiative. And that runs the gamut from climate change, natural resources, pollinators, and of course, again, something that's important to a lot of folks is managing parks, managing land for flood mitigation. And the last part, which is, and this is a shot of the 606, sort of Chicago's version of the High Line, which was a former rail, a 3-mile railroad converted into a trail. Parks are great for the economy. I would argue one of the best, and I'll highlight some specific to Chicago, but some national numbers. $166 billion is attributed to local park and rec and economic activity, over 1 million jobs, and the outdoor recreation economy is just short of $460 billion. I mean, these are real numbers. Obviously, they add to the quality of life. They'll boost your property value. This has been covered in over 30 studies. They'll boost your property value 8 to 10%. And 4 or 5 adults in our national surveys said parks is a major decision point for where they choose to live and buy their homes. Again, the other part I want to mention on good for the economy, and I think it's my 5th point, is it's good for jobs. Chicago happens to be the largest employer of youth in the state of Illinois. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes here for another stat. I've thrown so many stats at you guys. I mean, the bottom line is they're good for jobs. I think Chicago alone, we bustle in the summer to 7,500 jobs in the summer. So sort of put a pin on this first part. Parks are essential. They're good for people. They're good for the environment. And of course, they're good for the economy. So now I want to sort of move off the national front and sort of get a little deeper into my day job, which is Chicago, and what we're all about. I assume some of you know, or many of you know some of what we're about. Probably all of you don't know all of what we're about. We're arguably the largest park system in the country. Some have more acreage, some have more employees, some have, well, I think only New York has a bigger budget, but there's a lot of things we do that the other ones don't. As was mentioned previously, we're over 8,000 acres. We're up to 605 parks. We have 519 playgrounds. We have 246 field houses, 7 golf courses. The museums and the zoos are in our space. We're very proud of the fact that 99% of Chicagoans live within a 10-minute walk of our open space. But what sets us apart is well, one, Soldier Field. We own a football stadium, but really our influence on the waterfront. The entire 26 miles of lakefront of Chicago is controlled by us. We're the largest municipally owned harbor system. We control over 300 acres of riverfront, and we obviously the lakefront is the #1 driver of what we do. But you know, the takeaway is we're a lot of things to a lot of people in Chicago. This shot just gives you an example. Lollapalooza is us, which we just had. We're the largest providers of outdoor entertainment in Illinois. So we're everything from programs. We program over 100,000 children to managing the playgrounds, managing a lot of the sports stadiums. And there you see on the bottom left is the Air and Water Show, which was along that shot, I think, is Ohio Beach, but right near North Avenue Beach. This is a snapshot of our budget. It's budget season now. I think this budget for 2022 is going to be just short of $500 million. I won't belabor the statistics. The only thing that's critical to us, and it'll probably come up in the Q&A, is how are we funded? So in Chicago, like most park systems in Illinois and Minnesota too, we're a separate agency. So we are a 7-member board. They're appointed by the mayor and approved by city council. But once that happens, we become a state created body. And I work for the board. So we are a separate taxing agency, separate bonding, separate pensions, et cetera. Really quick, our capital program, and I know these numbers are big compared to a lot of what you're dealing with in the city, but I always felt everything's relative. Our capital program, though, for the amount of that operating budget and all those assets I rattled off, is only $30 million. Chicago is a city of 50 wards. And if you divide 50 into 30 million, it's only $600,000 per ward. $600,000 by Chicago's prices gets you one bells and whistles playground. That's it. So obviously, we have a capital deficit of billions of dollars. So how do you make it work? Well, you have to hustle, and you have to try to take that $30 million and turn it into $100 million on any given year. So I may be talking about bigger numbers on resources and acreage and assets, but when it boils down to it, I, like every park director really in the state of Illinois and really across the country, it all boils down to you're on a constant hustle for resources and funds. And some years you do great, and other years you just don't. Uniquely in Chicago, and I can get more to this, we on the back end, but we don't get a ton of federal relief as it applies to park development, with the exception of shoreline protection and some river development. And that comes through the Army Corps of Engineers. So what I wanted to focus on today, because I thought it was most relevant for all of you folks, was, what we're doing along our waterfront. So I'll start with the shoreline. I'll talk to you about our river. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about our natural areas, because I think it's relative to what a lot of you are up against. And sometimes natural area habitat can be a cheap way of cleaning up land, making it really desirable as open space, and it can be an economy driver. So let's start with the lakefront. So this is an overhead shot of our shoreline facing south. It's sort of an iconic shot, is pretty much a lot of the pictures I'm going to show you of our lakefront. So again, we're 26 miles of shoreline and 23 beaches and 10 harbors. This is essentially Chicago's front yard. But what also we're required to do is we have to spend a lot of time, money, and effort in protecting us from the lakefront. Our lakefront levels were so high in these past years, and a lot of that waterfront you see where people are standing right now, that was all underwater as recently as last winter and last fall. We have to partner considerably with the Chicago Department of Transportation, the Illinois Department of Transportation, as I mentioned before, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And what people don't always realize is that DuSable Lakeshore Drive, which runs essentially the length of the lakefront, that's a federal highway. And that's a blessing and a curse as far as us lobbying for dollars. But it's certainly something we use whenever we can when we're trying to get access to federal money. Obviously, this last shot also indicates, we're an economic driver with, this is an estimate, but 40 million visitors a year just to our lakefront. They come to our beaches, they come to our parkland, and they come to our concessions. These are snapshots of just last year. So some years aren't so bad, and some years are brutal. Lake Michigan can be as violent as any body of water in America, and in some respects no different than the Mississippi River, quite frankly. These are some shots this year of it just pounding this stretch. from just north of downtown, headed north, and causing us millions of dollars in damages. I actually think this was about $20 million that we had to deal with coming out of the pandemic. This is a shot of sort of the cheap version of recovery. Lots of stone, Army Corps of Engineer, rubble mounds. And again, you've still got to raise the money to do this, and you've got to do it privately or publicly. And we've had some success lately privately with some of our philanthropic partners in Chicago, not because they're necessarily shoreline enthusiasts, but they love our walking trail and our riding trail. And they know that those are off limits if you don't protect them. This is a creative shot. So this is not a permanent solution, but we've had so many areas that were underwater that we've essentially put these, they're called trap bags, up and down our waterfront for miles to protect us while we raise the money. So these things will last anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And it is our temporary solution. If we don't raise the type of money we'd like to for a permanent solution, we'll start looking at other things like riprap. And if you see those rubble mounds just to the right of the trap bag, that's what riprap is, if you're not familiar. This is a shot of what a real revetment project looks like in partnership with the Army Corps. It's very nice. It's also very expensive. And the long story short is we're in the middle of I'd say phase 2 of raising money to put together a comprehensive resilience plan for our entire lakefront. And then you take that resilience plan and raise the type of money you need to protect the entire lakefront. But this is maybe the funnest part of talking about the shoreline is the economic driver, whether it's the Air and Water Show, whether it's a triathlon, whether it's just general recreation. I mean, our lakefront, again, is iconic, really. It's probably anything in the country when you talk about the shots and the harbors, Navy Pier. Anybody selling anything in Chicago uses images of our lakefront as their clickbait. That I can assure you. Well, but I will tell you, and I've had the benefit of working for 3 mayors, Mayor Daley, Mayor Emanuel, now Mayor Lightfoot, was all 3 knew how important the river was. And, it's all different kinds of superlatives you can put on it. The bottom line is it is our second waterfront. And I'll use for today just general terms of the Chicago River, but the way Chicago is sort of what the real terminology is, the Chicago River runs basically through the heart of downtown. And then there's a north branch and there's a south branch that comes off of it. And if you've ever been to Chicago or you're familiar with it, I mean, even back in the 70s, it was some of the most polluted water outside of, I'd say, like Cleveland's river system, where, I mean, you didn't want to touch the water. It smelled. There was no habitat to speak of. Essentially, you stayed away from it. But Chicago, like a lot of cities, started to reclaim its waterfront, clean it up, invest in it. And now you see improved water quality, improved habitat. Access is second to none right now. And really, it's becoming more and more of an economic driver. This is a shot. This is probably from the 1890s, the 30s. So I'm not going to belabor the point of the Chicago River. Everyone knows what the riverfronts look like during industry, but rivers change based on the partners, the legislative changes, and then obviously massive infrastructure projects. Probably none more so for us than when we reverse the course of the river from running out to Lake Michigan to running in because we're polluting our own water. And I'll skip all the legislation, but here's some shots of habitat. And these are recent. This habitat here was done in the last 5 years. As a rule of thumb, habitat needs probably 8 to 10 years to really pop and really look good. But when you bring this habitat in, it's amazing the wildlife that comes back and the insects. You're cleaning up the site, and it does a tremendous amount of protection of your stormwater. Currently, we control about 6.5 miles of riverfront in Chicago. The vast majority of riverfront in Chicago is controlled by the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, or it's privately owned. But we spend a lot of time reclaiming it when we can, removing all our dams. And what we've seen to date is in the 70s, we had 10 species of fish. Now we have 70 species of fish. They're also very important for migratory birds. And you may not be a fisherman or a birder, but tourists are. And here's a great shot of an area that I'm not that old, but I can remember when everything we're looking at here was barren, just barren, 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 and contaminated. This is Pingtom Park. It's in Chinatown. It's just roughly south of downtown. It looks further away than it really is. But what you see here is a reclaimed riverfront converted into a park. That's a water taxi that picks people up every day from the south side of the city and jets them into downtown. And then on the right is a field house along with a boathouse. We built 4 boathouses along our river for crew, kayak, and canoe. And this is a kayak canoe site, that red building to the right. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. This is another shot. This, I believe, is Clark Park on the north side. People putting in, the bottom line is, why are people doing this? It's cleaner, it's prettier, it smells better, and it's more accessible. People want to be around it. If you make investment, they want to get to that riverfront. I mean, look at, we started out, Susan Troutman is a longtime member of NRPA and our former chairman of the board. I mean, St. Louis is one of the greatest examples of the beauty that they brought back to St. Louis in the amount of foot traffic to the river. It's breathtaking. This is a project we just completed last week. It's called the 312 River Run, and it's really cool. It is, I gotta get this right, it's 3 parks. It's 1 mile of trail, or 2 miles of trail and 1 bridge. And 312 used to be the prefix, the area code for all of Chicago. It's not anymore. This is ironically 773 now for the area code. But this was an area that had essentially turned its back on the river, and people were building around it. And we cleaned out a lot of the brush, a lot of the invasive species. And then we partnered with the Chicago Department of Transportation and the Friends of the River Community Group. We built this awesome biking and running trail that connects schools. There's multiple parks. We have an ice rink, but we have these great assets all along this part of the river, but they weren't connected. And ironically, they were really hard to get to until now. And this area, just the property value of this area is booming. Maybe the highest property value increase anywhere in the city. And then you come back to shots like this. You know, we're very much, our bread and butter is the program business. Non-COVID years, we introduced 6,000 kids a year to fishing. And the statistic, I think, is if a kid fishes once before the age of 13, they'll fish for life. But the river now for us is about getting young people rowing and kayaking, fishing, birding, and it's just getting people out there. And then, of course, you need to build some amenities, some bathrooms, and some concessions. So when people are out there, they're not out there for a half out there, they're out for a day. And here's an example of folks being out for the day. And this is not that old. I mean, I think this shot is probably less than 5 years old. Chicago has done a tremendous job with its riverfront. And I was Mayor Daley's chairman of his river committee years ago, and it was fits and starts because there really wasn't any power or any water down there, and it was really expensive. But I have to give Mayor Emanuel credit. Mayor Daley had the vision, Mayor Emanuel had the can-do, and just said, we're going to get people to the river one way or the other. And you see to your left, part of it is boater destination. You know, we're obviously a major player in the boating industry, but the challenge in Chicago is you have to have a destination in your boat. And there wasn't, ironically, a lot of destinations in Chicago where boaters could dock up. Now they can. And I mean, this area right now, it's a beautiful day. It probably looks like this right now, midday in Chicago. Here's another shot of the water taxi I mentioned, some other developments, the rental. I think one of the important things is, I think that shot on the right isn't, but REI has recently partnered with the city of Chicago to put their flagship store right on the river. And of course, if you've been here recently, the Apple store on the river is second to none. this is just sort of an overhead framework plan. But what this means, I sit on the city's plan commission, as I have for over 10 years. And I can tell you just the development of the discussion, where maybe there was a one-off river discussion, that to now where it's seemingly like every month we're looking at more and more development along the river. The Lincoln Yards and the 78. I'll show you some shots of these plans, and like a lot of us, that have been a frequent, whether you're a mayor of a river city or you visited other river cities, it's just this renaissance was one of the words you used in the introduction. This renaissance, Mayor, it's tremendous. And these shots, I mean, you can't get more exciting than what you're seeing here. And this is the 78. And this shot is, it's actually 78 acres of the South Loop of Chicago, which will dovetail then right into that shot I had of Pingtown Park. This is Lincoln Yards. I can't stress enough how crazy beautiful this is, especially when you consider a lot of the land to the left of the page was scrapyard. It is scrapyard, highly contaminated right now. A lot of environmental problems, but this is what the future of that section is going to look. And this is probably this will be some of the most expensive property anywhere in Chicago. And then I just want to finish with natural areas again. When I got to the Park District, I don't even think we had 200 acres of land that was classified as natural area. And we set a goal that we'd have 2020 by 2020. And I think we're just short of that now. I think we have a little over 1,900 acres right now. And make no bones about it, a lot of that comes from us acquiring land on the southeast side. The southeast side of Chicago is where all the steel industry was. That's our Rust Belt. So the land is really easy to acquire. People are giving it to us. Some of it is not so bad, contaminated wise. It's mostly like slag. It's like standing on the remnants of ore and steel production. Other areas are really contaminated. But we've had wonderful success out in these areas, because you can get funding from state and some federal sources. And B, it's amazing what Mother Nature can do with just a little bit of love and attention and funding. The southeast side of Chicago now is bald eagles, which I actually have seen personally. It's not just hyperbole. Here's just some shots that we've taken in our parks of wildlife, which obviously highlights habitat. This little bird is one of the most important birds anywhere in Chicago, and it can grab a headline as fast as anything else. I'd be lying to you if I told you I knew what a piping plover was 10 years ago. But this little bird, and he's got a tag on his leg. I don't know if this is Monty or Rose, but these two plovers launched such a feverish groundswell of support from birders all across the country that this plover movement is gone gangbusters in the Great Lakes. I can't remember which is which. Monty goes, I think, to Texas, and Rose right now is in Florida. But for the last 3 years, they've come back to the exact same spot on our lakefront. And I will tell you again, there's a lot of power and there's a lot of influence in the birding community. And when you're looking to build your lobby and your network, the birders are very, very important. I know Ducks Unlimited is part of this group too. Next slide. Yeah, this is just more shots. I mean, this is a great shot of parkland and us developing it with obviously the remnants of steel in the background. And again, I cannot stress enough, your partners with the EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. If you're in Illinois and Illinois Department of Natural Resources, these are invaluable partners because they all speak the same language. We all want the same things. And then again, you build that, and then the humans start coming back. And then you have the health benefits again, lower stress, lower blood pressure. In Chicago, and I know a lot of other cities, you've actually got doctors prescribing walks in parks for health benefits. Certainly for us in Chicago, kids, second to none. You get kids out in the outdoors now. They're outdoors for life. I know this isn't always the same for folks that live in more rural communities. They just, open space is just part of who we are, but it's obviously critical in a city as dense as ours. And last, I'll leave you with this: eco-recreation. It's just a fancy name for creating recreation opportunities to boost your economy. I think this shot here, that's an old iron ore wall, which is, it's massive, and it was part of this, another remnant of the steel industry. And we partnered, I think, on this one with North Face to build this handhold wall. On the right is some really creative art with remnants of the steel industry. Here's some shots of this eco-recreation park, and this is big. Colorado had boasted that they had there's a sport called cyclocross, and it's very much, if you're not familiar with it, it's very much, you get on a bike and you go through these crazy trails and you're running upstairs and you're back on the bike and you're doing all these super athletic things. But again, like birders, like wildlife enthusiasts, cyclists is a big part. There's a lot of people that like to cycle. And when you're organizing people and you're trying to find common ground and you're trying to find influence, I can just tell you personally, Overstar in Minnesota years ago was an enthusiast, a cycling enthusiast. Those people have influence. And once you find that common ground on parks, now you have a real chance to lobby and get in front of people that you need for those resources, which we know you all need. This is just a shot of some of our users. Here's another shot. Here's the statistic: 45 million people in America are bird watchers. 45 million. And we estimate it's an $80 billion industry in the economy. I'm going to wrap it up. That is a shot. No one has seen this yet. This is, again, this was built in partnership with Ford. Ford Motors has a plant not far from here on the southeast side that employs 7,000 people. And this was built with their generosity. This forward-thinking environmental building. I say happily, it's sort of in the middle of nowhere right now, but it's only in the middle of nowhere for now. When people start to figure out how to get to the southeast side of Chicago and thousands of acres of former brownfield and contaminated land into these natural areas, it's really exciting. Again, you're looking at an interior shot that essentially no one has seen yet. And then I've got a couple more slides. This is a cyclocross race. Again, these are people that are going down from all over the Midwest coming to race in this cyclocross race on the southeast side of Chicago that probably 95% of Chicagoans have never set foot on. It's just another beautiful picture, a backdrop of a natural area that was former. This was all brownfield and slag only a few years ago. And I was supposed to hold the 25 minutes. I got to be honest with you guys, I didn't time this thing, so I don't know if I went over or under, but hopefully I went under and we got plenty of time for Q&A for me or after our next speaker. So thanks for listening. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Kelly. It's inspiring to hear how parks can improve so much about a city and offer so many benefits. I know a reoccurring challenge for our cities is funding parks since they necessarily have traditional user fee structures attached to them. Large and small park systems struggle to realize the investment they require. Before we open the floor up to Q&A, I would like to introduce Mayor Melvin Carter of St. Paul, Minnesota, who has his own new park development appropriate for this discussion. Mayor Carter.
Hey, thank you very much. And thank you for the ability to chime in. What an incredible keynote. It just gives credence to something that I say to our residents all the time. And that is throughout the course of America, of human history, where there's water, there's people. Where there's water, there's economic activity, there's social vibrancy, and that we have incredible opportunities to leverage our riverfront. Here in St. Paul, we're very proud that we have two sides of the river. So we have more riverfront on the Mississippi River than any other American city. And we have the opportunities to leverage that riverfront for social activity, for cultural activity, for economic activity, for community gatherings, for entertainment, for park space, and all of the above. Increasingly, cities across the Mississippi River of all sizes have been looking to parks as this type of vital infrastructure, presenting co-benefits that far outweigh their costs and replacement of other forms of built development. Disaster mitigation, water regulation, property value stabilization, carbon sequestration, economic development catalysts are just some of the co-benefits that attract mayors to parks and outdoor recreation options. Whether they're large multi-purpose systems covering square miles within city limits or very small set-aside areas of less than an acre, all sizes of parks can deliver an economic contribution that is increasingly quantifiable as cities struggle with new levels of disaster impacts and the need to replace outdated legacy economies with new options. Right here in St. Paul, we're struggling with some of those exact same questions. As in the 4 years now that I've been mayor, we've experienced higher flooding stages on our Mississippi River than, historic levels of flooding on our Mississippi River and historic levels of drought that have brought our river historically low at the same time. We've experienced rock slides along the bluffs next to the Mississippi River. And we're constantly looking for new ways to help people to engage safely with our river and ensure that we all know that the river is very much the genesis of our city. Right now, we have some exciting visions in front of us to add opportunities for livability and development along our river from a Ford plant, another Ford plant. So you just heard about one from a historic Ford plant that we are redeveloping right along our river that will include park space for families and residents along our river and an exciting water feature at the center, to a river balcony that we are proposing for downtown that would bring our city back to our river, center our river back at the center of our city, and hopefully continue to add that economic and social vibrance and vitality that water historically and uniquely can bring to a community. I'm always inspired when I go places, whether it's the East Coast or other countries, when I go places where I see water being leveraged in those ways, because people, of course, are always drawn to water. And we look forward to continuing to leverage that knowledge, that awareness, and all of the riverfront that we have as we in St. Paul rehearse our mantra that we're stewards of the river, not only for ourselves, but to the entire rest of the country that we send the Mississippi River to. Thank you, Colin.
Great, thank you so much. We will go ahead now and open this up for Q&A. I see a couple of questions right now in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of the screen. First question, there is a fight on the Michigan coast over shoreline hardening. Are there efforts to do more natural solutions along the Lake Michigan shore versus shoreline hardening? Which have you found to be more effective at reducing erosion for the price?
I would argue, for me, it would be the hardscape. Unfortunately, we tried a natural front on our lakefront, and I'm going to be blunt, it failed miserably. I think I've experienced 6 100-year storms, which is incredibly frustrating when you're building this. Now, the good news is a lot of the natural habitat in the softscape, it's in relative terms, it's not that expensive compared to the hardscape. Anytime we're looking, as I mentioned in my presentation, we're going through these framework plans now to evaluate each sort of reach of the lakefront. You start out with the cheapest alternative and the most natural, and then you sort of back into the stone revetment. The challenge for us again is when you're working with the Army Corps and they price it out, they always start out with that riprap, those giant rubble mounds, which really doesn't get you anything. They're ugly to look at and they're inaccessible by people. So you've either got to go the natural route, which we've always had success lobbying with, or you got to go the hardscape route. So it's I wish I could say that the softscape was the better option for us, but right now it is more the hardening of the shoreline in most spots. And I see a hand up. Should we go to the hand, or do you want me to go to the next question?
We have one other question in the chat box. We can go to Shelley if she's ready.
Hi, yes, thank you. And I wanted to say that, as I discussed last night, American Queen Steamboat Company supports the creation of green space and natural infrastructure, particularly as part of riverboat landing opportunities in the communities along the river. And Mayor Lane, I know I met with you recently and walked your waterfront, which is fantastic. Many of our docking arrangements are with local parks departments, and we would welcome the opportunity to discuss ways that we can be part of design discussions and provide investment in these long-term sustainable projects. Green infrastructure not only provides a beautiful setting for our guests when disembarking the river boats, but provide communities with recreational and educational opportunities along the river. And perhaps most importantly, create flood control mitigation areas and reduce nutrient loading. We look forward to continuing our efforts to work with communities to support clean water and sustainable projects that will be in place for future generations. So anyone out there who is wanting to look at adding green space around the landing areas, please reach out to me to discuss how American Queen Steamboat Company can be part of the solution.
Excellent, thank you. The next question, how do you handle creating green space in existing low-income neighborhoods without pricing out residents?
Great question. And I just want to give a shout out to Shelley too, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes when you're sitting down trying to figure out solutions, you wouldn't think of necessarily a private group out of the top of your head, but then you're like, wait a minute, they're as invested in the river as we are. Those are really out of the box sort of thoughts. And a lot of times people, especially in government, even here in Chicago, no one ever thinks to just ask. And a lot of times when you ask, you get somebody on the other end of the line and they say, yeah, we are very interested. And you start putting the brain power together. And the next thing you know, you've got a working partnership that we love to talk about public-private partnerships, but a lot of them are fits and starts, and it's because people just don't ask, or they don't think to ask. Look, this is a really good question. It's too bad it's an anonymous attendee. Green space in low-income neighborhoods and residents is as hot a topic as anything in the country. Take, for example, the High Line, and I showed you guys that shot of the 606 here in Chicago. There was a lot of fervor about that. The 606 prices, I'm guessing, but I think it doubled. It doubled. A house that was $250,000 when we were finished was worth $500,000. I've done a lot of community meetings in every part of Chicago. From a park standpoint, everyone is entitled to the best park we can build them. That's not that I'm just counting housing or property taxes or any of that, but my team, our job is to build you the best park we can possibly build. When your city is doing things right, your planning commissioner is to your right and your housing commissioner is to your left. And you're going to the meeting as one voice and you're just discussing this with everyone, rather than me coming in one day, somebody else coming in the next day. There's a lot of discussion about this now with the Obama Presidential Center coming, and this idea that folks are going to be priced out. I can assure you our housing commissioner and our mayor have gone above and beyond to make sure the folks in Woodlawn is the main neighborhood where Obama Presidential Center, to make sure there's enough affordable housing for folks in the Woodlawn neighborhood, because inevitably the housing market is going to explode probably in the next 2 years in that area, if it hasn't already. So that is a really, really good question. And my advice is your parks people need to be going out to the community shoulder to shoulder with your planners and your housing people, all as one voice.
Great, thank you.
Mayor, can I chime in on that one as well? I think it's critical to continue, and thank you, Michael. That's important to hear. I think as we talk about all of those folks going to community together, I think first things first, we have to ensure that people in our communities of color and our low-income communities understand and have access to the recreational opportunities and the economic opportunities that live along the river. Our challenges around affordable housing aren't just depressing the costs of housing along the river. And it's as I heard inflected, I think in that last answer, it's ensuring that people who live along the river have access to those opportunities. We're developing the river because there's educational opportunities. We need to know that the children in our lowest income communities and in our communities of color have access to those educational opportunities. We're developing the river because there's recreational opportunities. We're developing the river because we think an incredible amount of economic opportunities can be realized through that. And so while we do that process of ensuring that we're building affordability and ensuring that some percentage of the units that we build are affordable at different percentages of area median income, our task is also to identify and harness all of the opportunities that we believe that development along the river can create for our community, and double down to ensure that those jobs, those investment opportunities, the real estate opportunities, the opportunities to build a business, all of those things are accessible to people along the river as well. Otherwise, folks who suggest that this development is happening for the benefit of someone else other than me will be creating their talking points for them. So that for me is the first thing first, to make sure that all of our residents and all of our community, that's one of our tasks that we always rehearse for ourselves, that all of our residents and all of our communities know that this is their river, that our children get a chance to engage in the river, to play in the river, to be on a boat in the river, to take a field trip in our national park next to the river, to engage in that river, so that when we say we're building these facilities, we're building this infrastructure, we can look at all of those members of our community and say, we're building it for you, not for someone to come and replace you in our community.
Mayor, can I follow up with a question? Can I ask a question to that, Mayor? I'm sorry to cut you off, Elvis, and welcome. What was traditionally the demographic use? Was it primarily white in St. Paul using the river?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been working to connect people with the river. The truth is, I grew up in this city and frankly didn't spend much time at all on the river growing up in this city. I've spent a lot more time as an adult than as a child. And this river, I mean, it goes literally right next to so many of our lower income communities, our communities of color. And they don't end up having access to the river in the same way as some of our white children do. So that is one of the first things that we have to change if we expect our city is a fundamentally different city than we are. I grew up in a majority white city. I'm mayor now of a majority people of color city. And if we expect our next generation to be the stewards of the river that we know that we ought to be, we have to make sure that all of our children grow up feeling ownership over our mighty Mississippi.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it goes without saying, this is an infamous statistic. Most of the children of color that live inland have never even been to that beautiful lakefront of Chicago, and that's just absurd. It's absurd. I applaud you. I applaud your efforts up there. My wife's in Minneapolis right now, by the way. So
is that right?
Yeah.
Tell her she's welcome here. And we use your work as an example here as we tell folks about, just as we set out to prove all the livability and all the possibilities that are possible when you invest in the waterfront. And obviously all of those spaces are public spaces already. It's about making them accessible and really intentionally inviting people and activating that space intentionally.
Well, that's the key. That's the key. Intent. It's not just talking about it, it's actually doing it. So I applaud you, because if there's nothing else, when you're in the park business, everybody talks a good game about parks, but now I'm getting fired up. But you have to do it. You have to lead by example. So fund your parks. I don't want to run out of time. Fund your parks, mayors.
Fund your parks.
With that being said, if you don't mind, I wanted to chime in too, because one of these really golden opportunities, I liked how we started this by saying that this is a renaissance. And the federal government really came to recognize the importance of parks during the pandemic, right? In terms of, it was one of the only spaces that remained open. And on top of that, it took on more services, right? And so you saw the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act, which had full funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. That's $900 million a year that is now going to states on the stateside program to fund backlog maintenance, and as well as, grow out some of the new green spaces through trails and other such facilities. And then you have the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, which is specifically designed, it's 125 to 150 millions a year, that is specifically designed to work with urban neighborhoods who often need these particular investments. And so here are two examples of where the federal government has really increased funding. And sometimes we find that folks aren't really aware of them. And so to be able to tap those is going to be important. There's the EPA Brownfields program and the Building Resilient Communities program out of FEMA that are also available there to be able to tap. So I think of Michigan, who really was able to even pioneer this new particular way of using federal money, where the governor was able to not only provide state parks, I believe it was either 125 million and 250 million with funding, and then local parks, which was either 125 or 250. I always get the numbers mixed up, but seeing that they were able to use American Rescue Fund, the American Rescue Plan funding for these particular funds. And then the last thing I'll say is that, you know, we have to really think of growing that sphere of influence that parks does, right? It's not just outdoor recreation, but it's out of school time education. As Mike said in his presentation, it's taking care of, you know, homeless communities. It's building workforce development opportunities. It's, you know, providing public health services, nutritious meals, you name it, Parks and Recs are doing it. And so really when we look at the type of funding on the federal level that cities and states can tap into for their parks program, to be honest, the sky's the limit here, or maybe the river's the limit, right? In terms of there are opportunities if the case is made well enough. I'm saying, like, look, parks are feeding people, parks are providing out of school time opportunities. And so I really encourage that creative thinking to be taking place because, you know, the benefits are boundless, right? You know, Mike's presentation really was effective in terms of the pictures that were being showed of how communities not only were able to increase value, right, for their residents, but they were creating this common space, making these communities vibrant and interconnected. And obviously, it's the public-private partnerships as well as these federal partnerships that we really need to be tapping more often to be able to think expansively of how to create, really deal with these challenges. I'll just end it by saying that I heard this and it really rings true to me, that we're often stuck with handling 21st century problems with 20th century solutions. And so thinking creatively, thinking expansively, and seeing how to tap those federal funds that are available there can allow us to do this without raising local taxes and really serving communities better. So thank you. I just wanted to add in, and Mike, thank you for your leadership at NRPA. You've been great helping us reach all of our pillars.
Thanks, my man.
I will direct people to the chat. Julie Waterman with the City Parks Alliance has mentioned their Mayors for Parks Coalition. That is a great resource for our cities. So feel free to email Julie.
Great, thank you. If there are no further questions or discussion, we can now round out our session this afternoon with Kate Orff, founder and principal of Scape Landscape Architecture, DPC. Scape is a design-driven landscape architecture and urban design studio based in New York and New Orleans. They believe landscape architecture can enable positive change in communities through the creation of regenerative living infrastructure and public landscapes. Scape works to integrate natural cycles and systems into our environments across all scales, from the urban pocket park to the regional ecological plan. Kate and her team do this through diverse forms of landscape architecture. We thought Dr. Orff's work would be a natural extension of this section, since her firm is a private sector version of the priority our mayors have around parks, multi-benefit critical infrastructure. Dr. Orff, and I'm sorry if I have butchered your name, I'll apologize. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, and all attendees. I'm such a huge fan of this format and this grouping. I have a couple of remarks today that can maybe add some detail or color to the superintendent's and the mayor's remarks. from earlier today. I am a landscape architect, and it is basically our charge to sort of bring your aspirations to listen to your communities and to essentially listen to your goals and to kind of ground those goals in physical design of spaces. So I've put in 3 examples today that can just describe how landscape reframed as infrastructure can really help to transform communities. So as landscape architects, yes, we build physical landscapes that includes living shorelines, civic parks. We could create social environments, and we also design for resilience and climate adaptation. So these are 4 snapshots of scape projects around the US. We have staff in New York City and New Orleans and are deeply committed to the regional landscape. And we work around the United States and are very committed to really kind of trying to reframe the American landscape and to bring all of these aspirations to bear across the United States. So we also, I think, serve as a critical bridge. I detected in many of the questions, this question of funding for parks. And in my experience in the last 25 years, many parks are not solely funded by the local government or federal government or state government. It's truly become more of a coalition of funding sources. So in many ways, we will be paid or funded by the Walton Family Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation in service of a locality or a community. So I think this notion of pairing private and public funding is really critical around the parks discussion. This is just a range of the kinds of clients that we have, from cities to agencies and authorities to foundations to big developers and universities and companies. But this issue of partnership is something that I think is very critical and is of great interest, particularly to the Mississippi River cities and towns. There are so many. We've worked with these agencies and these groups before, and there is such a great interest at this very moment, and rightly so, as we face kind of rethinking infrastructure and investing in infrastructure in underserved communities. There is so much interest, and I do feel like some critical pairings and some really sort of out of the box thinking around bringing in foundations together with local municipalities and authorities is going to be key to kind of open up the door. So we work on, or we conceive of parks and green space as 21st century infrastructure. It is, the environment that creates a very, powerful and very livable city. We believe that the future is really in these much more broadly connective, accessible, and resilient spaces. And we have also tried to focus on regional linear landscapes. The example on the bottom left of a 100 linear mile trail and greenway, blueway in Atlanta, and the one on the right, a 10-mile trail in the Hudson River Valley in New York, for example. Here is an example closer to home, Tom Lee Park. Your mayor colleague, Mayor Strickland in Memphis, Tennessee. And for example, Tom Lee Park is a 30-acre park that is part of a much bigger network of parks that Memphis and through the Memphis Riverfront Parks partnership has really been innovating. So we're just one tiny segment in this much more broadly expansive and connective project. Here you can see Mayor Strickland with the descendants of Tom Lee, for whom the park is named. So we've been working on this park. It is under construction, but it is also a way to connect Memphians back down to the river and kind of knit the city back with the river with enhanced programming, nature viewing opportunities. And in our plan, we've really tried to make multiple connections back to Memphis itself and the many neighborhoods that this park will serve. It's not a park with one entrance. It is an expansive park that links back up many formerly disconnected spaces. We've held open houses, and this is critical in terms of communication with your constituents to really kind of communicate what is the park about, what is the aspiration? Let's do a groundbreaking. And of course, Memphis Riverfront Parks is well known for their very creative and inviting programming to really get people to come to the river. These are the kinds of design material that landscape architects make. And I will say that in this case, there was this kind of dialogue between public and private fundraising was very apparent. The design materials, like the plan I just showed you, are also used to generate fundraising from multiple contexts to help move the park forward. And it's very attractive to corporations and individuals who are interested in birds or in climate and many, many issues that come forward. So it's really a front door, to and a connection to the mighty Mississippi for Memphis. Another project I thought would be interesting for this audience is our work with the Trust for Public Land on the Chattahoochee Riverlands. The scale of this project is rather mind-boggling. You can see the city of Atlanta, where my cursor is in the background. And the aspiration here is to develop a linear connected blueway and greenway along the banks of the Chattahoochee River, a river that has sort of been forgotten, if you will, within this region. I could only imagine the power and the tourism potential of a series of, there are many stretches of the Mississippi that have this kind of access and connectivity, but for some reason it's not all linked up. So I can only imagine the power of some thinking like this in different segments to attract tourism, this nature-based tourism that the superintendent was referencing earlier. So very quickly, you can tell this physical extent of the project area. You can see that in the top left. This is connecting from Metro Atlanta to north and south across 7 counties and 19 municipalities. We had over 280 stakeholder meetings, very intense listening sessions, and from that developed not only the corridor, the sort of right-of-way of the pathway itself, this sort of multi-purpose path, but also developed 5 sort of pilot projects in the areas that were the most sort of underserved in terms of infrastructure and investment. So there's a very, very strong equity and social justice component and lens to this project relative to where to start and how to emphasize and how to bring funding. But again, these kinds of images are used not only for clarity. We have many forms of drawing that really just go in a construction drawing set, but there are other kinds of images that are intended to provoke and inspire and engage the public and a broader audience. We also have integrated a lot of different activities, bringing people out. This is called a sort of a paddle, bringing out people to the river, having a model that moved from place to place to kind of bring attention and an understanding and a kind of sense of purpose and a coalition around this project. It involved many, many stakeholders and many convenings of these stakeholders. We also tracked river stories and began to collect the stories of people who lived here, economic stories, history. I was baptized here, etc. So we have a website that collects all of these stories and really makes it very personal. And this project becomes very personal for many people. So it kind of moves through both urban and rural, suburban areas. And so we've developed this kind of series of images of both more urban and more rural contexts to get everyone a sense of the landscape that is to come. And finally, a project example in Norfolk, Virginia, is our work with an engineering and architecture team, a larger team, but focused on the Ohio Creek watershed in Norfolk. And here you can see the context. You may know that Norfolk is definitely facing rather heightened sea level rise and is really trying to plan for the future, many government assets as well in Norfolk. And so our project really kind of focused in on the Ohio Creek landscape and we developed a kind of a larger scale shoreline resilience project with our engineering partners and the entire team. And then SCAPE began to zero in, because with these larger analytical projects, it's very important to know what is my fundable and executable next step? What is my implementation pathway? How can I think big and systemically, but implement? And so we did that in this project, and then sort of scaled down to the neighborhood across Grandy Village, and then developed a kind of a shoreline protection strategy that also improved school grounds, improved stormwater potential, and made a kind of a connective corridor that linked up to different neighborhoods and back to the creek itself. So here you can see how that this is the line of protection that sort of snakes through, and we developed a very large field and amplified some of the existing rec center programming through the introduction of new fields and courts as part of this project. So you can always tag and tie together co-benefits with any project. It doesn't have to be just a resilience project or just a landscape architecture intervention. It can be both of these things and have multiple benefits. So here's a snapshot into the school, the schoolyard enhancements, the field, the line of protection that snakes around that field and creates a berm so people can have almost a kind of a built-in bleacher, some of the sort of plazas. Here's that shoreline under construction right now, with the sort of wetlands, the double line of protection, and then the work that's currently happening. This is sort of a live photo of our sort of courts and play fields that are under construction. And finally, I will close with an exercise that is slightly more academic. I'm a professor at Columbia University as part of the Climate School and the School of Architecture. And recently with a group of students did a project or a study, a studio called Envisioning the Mississippi as a Living River. And actually Brant and Colin were great partners and collaborators in this. So we have developed over the past weeks projects that span from the headwaters and sort of zone in Minnesota to the Quad Cities area to East St. Louis, St. Genevieve, Cairo, Memphis, Greenville, Vicksburg, Plaquemine, and Barataria, and South Pass. So we have 11 projects. And I thought rather than go into detail into all the projects, I'll just put the link to this website in the chat for you all to peruse. Because one of the challenges of the studio was, how can we work together towards this larger goal of a sort of a healthy and vibrant Mississippi River landscape, all of the things that you've been talking about today and yesterday, and how can we understand how habitat, floodplain restoration, climate mitigation, economic recovery can combine across the system in different sites and scales, and how can these initiatives link up? And how can we shift more towards a sort of a green version of infrastructure? This kind of example in the background of this image is one that may be familiar to you when we had my colleagues in Holland present this project. It's called the Dutch Room for the River project. And this project is really conceived of as clusters of projects, initiatives that add up, because green infrastructure in isolation is not as effective as it is. There's a kind of a multiplicity of the small impact. So we need to think about these infrastructure and investments that can both link up across scales and rebuild local economies. So here's a kind of an overview of that Room for the River project with 34 different locations, a very inspiring example for certainly for the Mississippi. And so now I think I will close here and just shift over to this image and to the Mississippi River story map, and close with just a couple of quick views into what this might be. And so here is the story map, and it shows essentially the locations, the table of contents photography by the Virginia Hanusic, the portrait of the Mississippi, the design vision, the nature-based strategies based on a white paper that my center at Columbia sort of supported the National Wildlife Foundation and a consortium of groups to work on. And then we began to pair these kind of strategies with each of the cities. And so you can see here from the headwaters to the Quad Cities, I'll just open this one, the kind of range of student work that came from this. Of course, it's student work, but it's also deeply inspiring because in a way, many of these projects can, inspire you to think differently. And of course, I'm showing Davenport, Mr. Mayor, to show you what the students were looking at here. So I will stop there. I will stop sharing my screen and just say thank you very much and very happy to be part of this day.
Well, thank you very much. It appears that you're doing some pretty innovative and exciting work at SCAPE. We've got some time for questions from our participants. No questions at this time, no hands or anything in the question or answer.
Actually, Mayor Lane, I have a question for Kate. Thanks so much, Doctor, for joining us. And it was thrilling to be part of your studio at Columbia University. We had a great experience. Your students are just top notch, always inspiring to work with students. And they came up with some great ideas. I had a question though about the Chattahoochee project you mentioned. It's similar to a long awaited, long desired project on the Mississippi River that sort of has had different starts and finishes over the decades. And that is to create a Appalachian Trail like avenue or right of way for biking and walking along the entire Mississippi River from Lake Itasca to the Gulf of Mexico. This would be one trail that's contiguous, connected all the way down. And you would have views of the river, hopefully more than 50% of the time. So I was just curious about the scale of the Chattahoochee project and where was it starting from? Were they starting that from scratch? Did they need to figure out just how to link disparate sections of trail that had already been there over the years, or what was the major dynamic in that, or is the major, I guess it's still ongoing, of that project?
Yeah, that's a great question because this was a project that has almost extended back to Jimmy Carter in the years of MRPA and his, the work of, restoring and cleaning the river, which several others have also already mentioned, seems to be the first step. So what was quite interesting, although this has been a dream, it is only in the past, say, 5 years that the water has been clean enough that it's been desirable and accessible to go there. So I think it's an important model because in this case, there was and I put the Riverlands website in the chat. This is, again, a public-private partnership with Trust for Public Land, and then, of course, City of Atlanta County and Cobb County and ARC, the Atlanta Regional Commission. So there is a strong consortium of multiple scales of organization in the Atlanta region, and there is a strong sort of nonprofit partner. But the second part of your question, it has been very much a combination of, linking up existing mapped right-of-ways and finding new paths that, frankly, we have one that's called the path of least resistance that doesn't require a lot of any buyouts or land acquisition. And then we have like a more sort of ideal path that snakes more closely along the riverbank itself, which does require land acquisition. So we gave this ownership group multiple paths forward. And so the idea is that over time, these parcels will be linked up. These smaller nodes that connect the pieces will be built as kind of park access nodes. And it's a long, partnership over many years to implement the trail in its entirety. But having the path routed is key. And it means that everyone knows where they're meeting and knows how this is going to link up. I share this dream of a connected Mississippi pathway, as improbable as it may be at moments.
Thank you. That's very informative. We're looking for projects that may help us inform, because recently some folks have come to us about the possibility of creating a large-scale financial vehicle that could actually fund a project the size of an Appalachian Trail for the Mississippi River. It would be one of the top 10 longest trails in the world if it were to come to fruition. But it's done relatively often all over the world. These trails, these mega trails are not uncommon. And now they too are going through an awakening. Countries are adding to their existing trail networks and creating these huge trails that go all across their nations in various continents. So there might be a little bit of a bandwagon for us to hop on, and it no longer would be a pie in the sky situation, hopefully. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Great.
If Brandt or Mayor Lane, if there aren't any other questions, a question was given to me for actually Mr. Kelly. Sort of get his advice on something, but I don't want to interrupt anybody else's question. I'll only ask it if nobody else has one.
Yep, go right ahead.
Mr. Kelly, a challenge that we have had, and I think you are no stranger to this, looking at all the different types of properties that your parks have moved into and that you have created parks out of. A challenge that we have along the Mississippi River is using, a lot of cities are no stranger to using outdated infrastructure and repurposing it to something else, like has been for former industrial sites. They become a brownfield or they become a gray field, they get cleaned up, and then they get repurposed into some other form of development, a lot of times a park. Because they happen to be, these industrial sites a lot of times are by bodies of water, because that's how they got the material, the raw material and the finished material in and out a lot of times. But what about on the Mississippi River, we have legacy infrastructure that isn't going away and it's still used. I'm talking about levees. Levee systems, they're not going away. They protect critical national infrastructure in various places. But we're looking at ways to generate more benefits from a levee rather than just being a wall for water, using them for trail networks, using them for catchment basins, sort of using them to juxtapose various different types of natural infrastructure, maybe a marsh or a wetland, like what they've done with their levee, the giant levee in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. So I wonder if you have any advice on, or have you run into not just replacing legacy infrastructure that's no longer used, but having a sort of outdoor recreational component to a piece of infrastructure that is very legacy, but also still very much in use?
So you sort of answered your own question. You said all the answers to your own question, right? Whether it's outdoor recreation or it's marshland, or I'm not a levee expert by any means, but I will tell you this. My approach to park development is to sort of go to the community. And the first thing is ask them what they want. Because if what they want is something that you agree with, then right off the bat, you're of like mind. Sometimes you hit it off, sometimes you don't. we're the park experts to some degree. So you have to come in and you have to say, okay, I know you want this, but it's just not going to work, or it's not cost effective. The next thing is your source of funds. I'm going to be honest with you. What are your source of funds? How do you get your hands on the money, and what do you have to build to satisfy whatever the requirements of the funds are? A lot of times, like if it's transportation, you got to get really creative. In Chicago, the challenge is it's great that we're a separate taxing body, but we're at the bottom of the list when it comes to the Chicago Department of Transportation or HUD money or any of the federal sources. I'm at the bottom of the food chain, and yet I've got infrastructure and I've got bridges and I've got water and I've got roads. So what you have to do is you have to sort of assess the need, assess the source of the funds, obviously assess what the community needs, and then you got to get really creative. And I guess last but not least, you have to get permission from whoever owns that levee, whoever owns that property, and then, you know, have to convince your lawyers that you're not taking on too much liability with it either. But I think you answered your own question with start with the simplest approaches, wetlands, natural areas, outdoor recreation, pretty much everything I laid out in the beginning. Those are sort of cheap fixes that are beautiful. They don't cost a lot of money. There are sources out there, and at least you can make those advances, get people excited about seeing the beauty. That part of the tough part about the park business is people don't always have vision. They have to literally see it. Well, you know, we used to call it prairie in a can. You take 3 acres of land and turn it into a wild natural area overnight, and people start to see the beauty and Mother Nature come back to life, and the insects and the birds and the wildlife. Now people start thinking, oh, this really could be a park, and we should fund the next 3 acres and the next 3 acres. And so that's probably I don't know if I answered the question, but that's how I would approach it, whether it was a levee or really any sort of hardscape or former industrial area. And you know, you can never discount. You have a community meeting and someone has a wild idea, and then you're driving away from it and you're going, holy cow, I never would have thought about putting handholds on a climbing wall of this oral wall. I mean, that's probably the greatest example of that picture, because you'll never knock that wall down. That wall, that it would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to knock that wall down. So what do you do with it? Well, you let people climb on it. That's about the simplest, cheapest way to do it. But now you call it Steelworkers Park, and you get North Face to sponsor it, and all of a sudden you've got a destination. So that's my answer.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Great.
The only other thing I wanted to add is, you know, obviously a trail the length of the Mississippi is ambitious, but so what? You know, Chicago's been wrestling with for years how to unite our trail. And, you know, we were lucky enough to pass a law that said you have to have a 30-foot setback on any part of it. You have to mandate public access. And 20 years ago, we were like, this will never go anywhere. Chicago's changing so rapidly with its river now, and there's so much development that even rehab work triggers this setback and this public access, and all parts that we never thought we'd have access to. People have access to. So it's like if you were to look at an overhead shot of our river system, it's amazing how it's linking up faster than any of us thought it would. So I think it's ambitious, but I think it's well worth it.
Great answers and great discussion. Seeing no further discussion in the chat or through the raise your hand function, we can close this session and move to our next formative conversation, which promises to announce the addition to some parks and green space at a whole new scale. I will now hand the meeting over to my colleagues, Mayor Jim Strickland of Memphis, Tennessee, and Mayor Robert Eastern of East St. Louis, Illinois.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Good to see everyone. Good afternoon. As it was said, I'm Jim Strickland. I'm Mayor of Memphis. And as a side note, I'm broadcasting from the attic of my house because I'm in isolation. I was diagnosed with COVID last Friday, And I just want to say, thankfully, I am vaccinated and the vaccines work. But I'm also happy to be here. And I'll be joined for this session. And this session is going to be on deploying natural infrastructure projects. And I'll be joined by Mayor Robert Eastern of East St. Louis, Illinois. Today's detailed announcement on the results of our natural infrastructure disaster absorption capacity study follows from a year's worth of work and analysis. Further, the results of this study will inform the deployment of natural infrastructure projects in the near and longer terms to mitigate for the increased risk we are facing in our new climate world. MRCTI partnered with 2 Degrees Adapt, Cargill, Black & Veatch, One Architecture, and others to complete a study on where to deploy what kind of natural infrastructure assets, at what scale, to reduce disaster risk for some of the most vulnerable areas of the Mississippi River corridor. I'm happy to say we're joined by the lead investigator for this. And I want to recognize, and I'm going to mispronounce your name, and I'm sorry, I think, Adi Renate, the managing partner at 2 Degrees Adapt, to summarize those findings. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Strickland. It's an honor to present the findings of the study. I'm going to share my screen. I hope everyone can see it. So my name is Adi Ranade, and I represent 2 Degrees Adapt, and our mission is to make climate resilience actionable by combining climate science and analysis of technologies and nature-based solutions. We work with and analyze a number of climate perils, including flooding, wildfires, droughts, but of course, all of you and your cities are very well familiar with a number of different kinds of floods: riverine floods, flash floods, storm surge driven flooding. And I believe, 2019 and 2020 were in particular challenging years. This year we have a different challenge, at least in upper Mississippi, of drought. But no doubt all these challenges are driven and made more intense by climate change. And this is why we do what we do. We quantify the economic impact of these different perils, sometimes in combination with each other, under specific timeframes and emissions scenarios. And then we map different technologies, and we include nature-based solutions very much in that to specific perils. And our ultimate measure of success is whether our work results in getting projects off the ground. And that's why working with MRCTI, our partners, and Ducks Unlimited in particular is so exciting to see the results of our analysis turn into action. Mississippi River is very, very critical for our nation, and I would argue indeed the global food supply, not only for food production, but also transporting it. So maintaining these waterways in face of increasing extreme weather events is critical. So understanding the hydrology of the Mississippi River Valley and broadly speaking, the basin in face of a changing climate is where we have started from. The climate is changing in 2 different directions. Throughout upper and lower Mississippi Valley, we're going to experience higher temperatures, higher summer maximums, as well as higher precipitation on average. And I'm using the word here on average very deliberately, because we're going to experience periods of intensely high precipitation followed by extreme drought. So it's going to switch between these extremes, as evidenced by what happened in 2019, 2020, and what we're experiencing this year. And depending on which emissions scenario we choose, or how much of these emissions we're able to sequester, again through nature-based solutions, will determine the extent of the problem that we have to manage. But one thing is for sure, all of your cities are experiencing floods with more discharge and longer duration. Case in example here being Baton Rouge. Unfortunately, the existing gray infrastructure in many cases is not able. Unfortunately. Oh, am I coming across correctly? Are you able to hear me and see my slides okay?
Yes, you're perfect, Adam.
Yes.
Okay. I thought I heard an echo or something. So if I can leave you with a single thought from this presentation, that our infrastructure, including the flood management infrastructure, was built for a climate that no longer exists. That's why we're requiring more and more intervention and more usage. So the question really is there an alternate way? Is there a combination of nature-based solutions and better practices to manage our existing infrastructure that can lead to adding capacity and mitigating flood risks? And how can we quantify a number of co-benefits such as carbon sequestration, nutrient removal for these nature-based solutions? So the first question to ask is, flood is a volume problem, right? So we're talking about how much water do we have to handle? So we really looked at this problem with a 1% riverine flood lens, and we were joined in this effort with our sponsors, Cargill, Black & Veatch, and One Architecture in particular, and Black & Veatch and One Architecture even as research partners. And Army Corps of Engineers was extremely key in helping us understand levee safety, levee characteristics, dimensions, and Ducks Unlimited in helping us understand wetlands, the different costs involved, how do carbon, nitrate, and phosphorus cycles work in forested wetlands and other types of wetlands. So we just want to acknowledge all of our partners in this cohort that we have brought together. So we really started with this notion, okay, let's look at 1% flood. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on drawing contrast between the terms 1 in 100-year flood versus 1% flood. And as you will see in this chart, a so-called 1 in 100-year flood actually has a much higher probability of occurrence over a 100-year period of time. So we have stopped using that terminology. We just call it a 1% flood. And as you can see from here, it's actually a lot more frequent than you think. So the question really is, we know climate is changing. We know precipitation overall is increasing. And definitely that will result in a higher amount of volume in the river on average. So what will a 1% flood look like in future climate? And this future is not far off. It may be as close as 2030, and certainly 2050 and 2080. So we looked at 35 locations along the main stem of Mississippi where we had access to good quality historical observations from the gauges maintained by U.S. Geological Survey and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we believe these 35 locations, they do a good job of representing the diversity of now 100 plus MRCTI communities. From northern Minnesota all the way down to southern Louisiana and a number of locations in between. You will notice that around key urban centers here, like the Twin Cities or St. Louis, we have multiple locations that we have analyzed. So a 1% flood is going to get much bigger in 2030, almost across the board, save a few locations north of the Missouri confluence, where you will see still big floods, but smaller discharge relative to 2005. South of the Missouri confluence, even in 2030, the volume is going to increase, by 5%, 10%. By the time you get to 2050 and 2080, it's basically a deluge across the board. And this is analyzed under RCP 4.5, that emission scenario. So of course, how severe this problem gets to some extent is in our hands. What does this mean for the existing levee infrastructure? So we work closely with Army Corps of Engineers Levee Safety Division and looked at the levee dimensions, crest, other variables. And here we have taken the probability of overtopping as a breach mechanism. So this is not mechanical breach. So I just want to be clear about that. But what we have noticed is for 17 levees across 9 locations, 9 cities, there is a significant probability of overtopping. It ranges, 100% on the high side to low 60s on the low side. And you will notice here, especially in southern Mississippi Valley, cities like Greenville, Baton Rouge, you have multiple levees with very, very high probability of overtopping if there is a 1% flood in 2030. And surely some of these cities are going to experience a 1% flood, sometime in that time period. So we looked at these 17 levee districts across these 9 cities, and you will see these being shown on the map and being reflected in the Ducks Unlimited presentation that will follow my presentation. So with that in mind, and remember, for each of these locations, and indeed all 35 locations, we had estimates on how much water we are talking about, because that is very, very key, right? Because nature-based solutions like wetlands, reforested wetlands, or the floodplain expansion strategies like reservoirs or spillway creation, you have to know how much water you're talking about in order to reduce the probability of overtopping and reducing the damage. And our partner, Black & Veatch, was very helpful to us in not only as a financial sponsor, but also as a research partner in doing this literature review. I'm showing an excerpt here for benefits of wetlands in water retention, water diversion, nutrient flow, and carbon sequestration. Combined with that, we interviewed all the cities here that we're listing here, and we really, really appreciate the time mayors and city planners spent with us. And I want to particularly acknowledge our sponsor and research partner, One Architecture and Urbanism, that conducted these interviews with us. Of course, the conclusions that I'm going to show you here, they don't they don't reflect the richness, that fully reflect the richness that these interviewed showed us in how the economies of these different cities work. What are the critical assets? May they be historical neighborhoods, historically underserved and low-income communities, where they're located with respect to levees and pumping stations, what has been the historical experience of flooding in those cities, where there are potential issues and lawsuits kind of standing in the way of deploying solutions. So there's just a lot of richness there that I'm not able to show in 30 minutes here, but I do want to acknowledge openness with which the city planners and mayors share that information with us so that we could look at the types of projects that were feasible. So the types of projects, broadly speaking, in two categories: shovel ready, these are 100 to 300 acre projects within city boundaries, and many of them like St. Genevieve, wetland restoration through reforestation project, they're already under consideration. Here, as I'm going to show, the return on investment is primarily driven by co-benefits such as carbon and nutrient removal, carbon sequestration and nutrient removal. Mega projects that often contain areas outside the city boundaries, these are on the order of 10,000 acres. And these have significant potential for cutting the peak of a 1% flood. And this peak is the most damaging part of the flood curve. Here I'm showing images of the St. Genevieve restoration along levee number 3, and a potential project in Vicksburg, Eagle Lake restoration. As you can see, this is very, very large, 8,700 acres. So obviously, if a project like this were to go forward, it would involve significant planning and resettlement of communities and folks. So what's that key size, right? How did we arrive at that number that we need acreage on the orders of tens of thousands of acres? So we did this analysis of, to reduce let's take one location, levee number 2 in St. Genevieve, 1% flood in 2030. It has a probability of overtopping 93%. Now, to bring that down significantly, down to 83%, we are talking about offsetting 95,000 cubic feet per second of peak discharge, right? So if there is a set of wetlands with 60,000 acre feet of flood storage, we can do that for 8 hours of peak discharge. And remember, peak is the most damaging period during flood. An alternative, or maybe a strategy in combination with this, if we had a reservoir like the reservoir near Des Moines, 640,000 acre feet, we can fill about a third of that and then store it for 24 hours, right? But whichever approach we take, cutting that peak off of a major flood is a local problem. According to a number of flood experts, notably an expert at NOAA that we interviewed. Of course, smaller projects can still contribute very significantly to lessen the impact of more frequent and smaller riverine floods. Remember, all this calculation that you see is for a 1% flood. So these are the most severe, right? Smaller projects can also contribute significantly to mitigate other types of floods, for example, flash floods. And here I want to mention a particularly interesting project of creating a series of detention ponds that the city of Baton Rouge is considering, totaling about 200 acres, but they all sit behind the levee and are aimed at mitigating flash floods. And of course, co-benefits of carbon sequestration, nutrient removal, and recreational tourism. Now, 2 degrees adapt is not exactly, and not by any stretch of imagination, an expert or not even novice at estimating recreational benefits. But what we do know is carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus cycles. So that's what we have attempted to do here. remember, these are biological assets. So we did this exercise of what if there was a 200-acre wetland reforestation opportunity where city owns the land. This was in part kind of inspired by the Saint Genevieve project. So through a thorough literature review, informed by Black and Veatch and certainly Ducks Unlimited, we found excellent academic as well as project literature on what is the typical mix of trees in Mississippi alluvial valley, what is their carbon sequestration and nitrate phosphate potential look like, how it changes over a 20-year time period. That's why we did a 20-year NPV analysis, because these are biological assets. It takes a certain amount of time after these trees are planted to get them productive. We assumed relatively aggressive carbon, nitrate, and phosphate prices, right? So what we're trying to analyze is, we know that under today's conditions, the return on investment is going to be perhaps low single digits. But if there are robust carbon and nutrient removal markets, for example, what if, the Microsoft price on carbon dioxide removal that they're offering today becomes the norm, right? $20 per metric ton. And the markets for nitrate and phosphate removal that exist in small pockets today, like Iowa, most notably pioneered by Quantified Ventures, what if they were to become more mainstream? Then we're looking at a significant rate of return, 9%, good 20-year NPV. Payback period is, of course, long because, as I said, these are biological assets. They take time to build and get productive. Of course, all this is going to require new business models and financial instruments where all the stakeholders that stand to benefit from these assets, may they be cities, may they be private sector asset owners, like one of our sponsors, Cargill, they should get an opportunity to participate. They may be downstream beneficiaries like water utilities. There may be other players here, and certainly federal agencies. So public-private partnerships and new financial instruments are going to be very critical in making these projects happen. So in conclusion, I would like to say that it's very apparent to us that changing climate will result in larger floods along the main stem of Mississippi in the decades to come. A number of levees run the risk of overtopping in the event of a 1% flood as early as 2030. And in that scenario, nature-based solutions can provide an effective option to cut the peak period of a riverine flood through mega projects and generate good return for small-scale projects through carbon and nutrient removal markets. Cities can undertake small nature-based solution projects relatively easily, but more of a regional cooperation approach and patient capital is needed to execute on mega projects. And I think we're very excited to be part of the cohort for the Mississippi River Infrastructure Fund. I think it's a step in that direction. And again, truly honored to be part of this event and the opportunity to present results of this natural infrastructure capacity study with all of you. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions either right now or at the end of this session.
Thank you, Addy. Furthermore, MRCTI has additionally partnered with Ducks Unlimited to design and deploy natural infrastructure projects throughout the Mississippi River Valley. Using 2 degrees adapt disaster capacity study as the guide for the places of this project of what level of invention and maximum return now in the longer term. We need resilience that we can afford, that is multiple benefits and reduce nutrient load, tourism, outdoor recreation, mitigating for not just for flooding, but also drought and intense heat, as well as adding a climate performance. Dr. Karen Waldrop, Chief Conservation Officer of Ducks Unlimited, along with Dr. Ellen Hubert of the Ecosystem Services Scientist, and Dr. Michael Churchill, chief biologist. They are all here to detail infrastructure projects in the upper, middle, and lower river corridor that will deploy and fall into 3 categories. 1, shovel ready, meaning the project is designed and funded. 2, pending, and meaning the project is majority design and funding is identified. And 3, near term, meaning that the project is in design phase and is larger scale and the funding is being evaluated. Thank you all for being here at this time.
Wonderful. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you again to the mayors, to the MRCTI, and to our partners. I'm really glad to be back for a second day of your meeting. This has been wonderful, and I have learned a lot, and it's really exciting as well. But yesterday we presented a high-level overview of the scale of the natural infrastructure pilots that we've identified to increase resilience of your cities in the river corridor, while at the same time providing opportunities for carbon sequestration, water quality improvement, recreation, and tourism. So today it's my pleasure to introduce DU's Big River biologist Mike Sertle and also Dr. Ellen Herbert, our ecosystem scientist, to dive a little bit more into the project details and share even a video tour of select shovel-ready projects for you today. Just to give you a little bit of background on the two of them, Mike, he's a third-generation Mississippi River rat. He's from Pool 12. He was born and raised not far from Dubuque, Iowa, which is an MRCTI town. He received his BS from Western Illinois University and a master's from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And after college, he did a stint with the USGS, working on ecosystem services and threatened and endangered species research in the Northern Prairie Wildlife Research Center. Then he came to Ducks Unlimited in 2007 as the Indiana and the West Michigan biologist, and most recently he was our Illinois biologist for the last 8 years. He was just recently promoted and is now Ducks Unlimited's Upper Mississippi River biologist. And with this, what he does is he coordinates our Upper Mississippi River program and all of our projects with MRCTI. He also works with our conservation partners and our DU engineers, biologists, ecosystem service biologists, our lands program, and other staff as well. Currently, he's based out of the Metro East St. Louis office at our Big River field office in Illinois. Dr. Herbert, her family hails from Memphis, and she grew up in Arkansas. After about 15 years studying wetlands all over the United States, Ellen came back home to work on as our ecosystem service scientist at Ducks Unlimited, and she's in our Memphis headquarters. She received her PhD from the School of Public Environmental Affairs at Indiana University, where she was a graduate student, graduate research fellow for the National Science Foundation. And then she did her postdoctoral research in the Department of Physical Sciences at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And I just have to say, from DU's perspective, we are truly blessed to have these two wonderful biologists on our team. Ellen, as our ecosystem scientist, she has just taken us leaps and bounds, and Mike Sertle taking over this program is simply amazing. It's giving us real purpose. So I'm really proud to introduce the two of them to you today. And Ellen, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to take them on a deep dive of these projects.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Addie, for your presentation before us. We've really enjoyed getting to work with Colin and the mayors, as well as Addie's team at 2 Degrees Adapt, to start putting together a large-scale portfolio of projects to present. And as Karen reiterated yesterday, we are always ready and willing to talk about additional projects to add to this portfolio, but we're pretty excited to unveil what we have now. And we may have some new audience members from yesterday, so I'm going to very quickly go over our introductory material. But then I'm really going to hand it off to Mike to get into some of the nitty-gritty, exciting details of some of these projects. So, a really short introduction to Ducks Unlimited. We are a wetlands habitat conservation organization. We are considered the leaders in wetland habitat conservation in North America. We started in 1937. And we really consider ourselves unique in that we're a truly turnkey organization. So we do everything from the science of site prioritization and identification, quantification of benefits, building partnerships, securing funding, doing the engineering, design, and permitting of these projects, and managing construction. So we have an 80+ year history working on these complex water engineering projects. And we have a really great team to do that, and are really excited to deploy that team in the name of the Mississippi River and its cities and towns. And so this is a map where I really highlighted the density and number of projects we've done on the Mississippi. You can see all up and down the Mississippi. We have a really long history of work, and particularly the Mississippi Alluvial Valley and the confluence of the river with its tributaries, which is where we tend to see quite a bit of this floodwater back up. As I said, we do a lot of things both on the river corridor and in the headwaters of the river that really we hope when they are at scale will benefit the mayors and towns and the economies of the Mississippi River. Everything from protecting and enhancing the ability of the headwaters of the Mississippi to store water and remove pollutants, to getting down to bottomland reforestation, floodplain easements, and coastal wetland restoration that really impact your towns on the main stem and in the Mississippi River Delta. So I think the theme of this meeting has really been surrounding building resilience in these communities. And we know from the experience of almost everyone on these calls, we've had a lot of impacts from both coastal and inland flooding across the communities of the Mississippi River. And so this is 10 years of presidential flood disaster declarations. And you can really see those are really cropping up in your cities and states on the Mississippi. We know Mississippi River flooding is worse now than any time in the last 500 years. And as Addie mentioned, there is a component of this that is the frequency and intensity of precipitation attributed to climate change. We also know that a big part of the change in the hydrology of the Mississippi is human activity. So building levees, draining the floodplain, all of these activities. And the bright side of that is that some of those things are reversible. We can start to think about where land is better used for flood storage, for instance. So while we may not be in a position to address reversing the frequency and severity of storms, we can start to do what Addie discussed in his presentation, which is really give those storms somewhere to go that's not your valuable city infrastructure. So just thinking about scale, DU's work in the Mississippi River Valley in just 1 year, that's what this graphic represents. I won't read through all of it, but I just want to note high level, we're looking at billions of gallons of water storage, hundreds of tons of carbon sequestered, millions of pounds of fertilizer removed from the waterway, additional value in recreation and other types of value brought to your communities. And then what has been driving us is really the biology of this system. It's super important for the migratory birds on which our organization was built. So because we have so many of these overlapping priorities, because DU is really invested in improving the river at scale, making it a more resilient system. Back at your last meeting, we got to sign a really neat memorandum of common purpose. There's Mayor Strickland, who's moderating us today with our CEO, Adam Putnam. And really the purpose of that memorandum was to develop an agenda to deploy natural infrastructure that would not only absorb floodwater, but as has been discussed so many times, provide the additional co-benefits that natural infrastructure or green-gray hybrid infrastructure can provide: public recreation, increased habitat, improved water quality, and carbon sequestration. So I'll sort of get on to the main point here, really, which is what those projects are going to be. So we have split up our projects. We have a sort of riverine flooding pilot focal area, and that's the mid-river geography that Mike is going to speak to you about in just a moment here. We also have projects that are around the Memphis, West Memphis area that are really focused less on flooding, more on recreation and reforestation. And then finally, getting down into the New Orleans area, we're really thinking not only about riverine flooding, but particularly projects that can address coastal storm surge along the river. These projects, as I present them and Mike presents them, will be divided up into a few categories. As Mayor Eastern said, we have projects that are sort of binned in certain timelines. So we have those projects that are shovel ready and ongoing, projects that are in design, and projects that are in planning. And those projects are further separated into engineering projects, that is projects where the land has already been secured, and what we're doing is moving dirt to allow those projects to take on more water. We also have protection projects, and that's where we're working with voluntary incentive-based land conservation to purchase or acquire land in another way that allows for more riverine flooding. And so you'll see these as a theme throughout the slides. So the pilot project rationale, what are we thinking about when we selected these projects? So one of our first criteria was that they were in or upstream of the 2 degrees adapt study identified location. So we focused on the mid-river for a few reasons. One, that was where we had a lot of shovel-ready work. 2, it's a region where we're not dealing with the 500-year flood levees that exist south of St. Louis, which are a little bit more difficult to address. And we really wanted to look at projects in and around those levee districts and cities identified by Addy and his team for projects that had the potential to increase flood storage. And so this is an image actually from a great set of projects in the Netherlands. As many of us probably know, they are the masters at water resource engineering. But this is an example from their Room for the River program that I think is a really almost perfect representation of the types of projects that we selected. And so this is a project that sort of takes over part of the floodplain, allows for water to come in at one end, and then has a controlled release of that flood water. And that's, I think, what's key here. And Mike will go over this in more detail with each project, but these aren't projects that just allow water to flow in and out. They're projects that are designed to increase the capacity to store flood water. And we're really looking at projects that have tangible results. I love this as an example of a project where we worked with public lands partners, the Fish and Wildlife Service. This is Shiawassee National Wildlife Refuge. As many of you may remember, the dams on the Tittabawassee River that collapsed during a 1 in 500 year rain event in Michigan. This project at Shiawassee National Wildlife Refuge absorbed 10,000 acre feet of floodwater and demonstrably prevented destruction of downstream infrastructure, homes, and public places. And so this is a big project. 10,000 acre feet of floodwater is a lot, as Addy said, but on the Miss, we're going to need a lot more than that. But we really do want to see, as Mayor Broom pointed out yesterday, some quick and tangible wins from this where people see impacts. With that, I'm going to introduce to you a little video that will give you a eagle eye view, or maybe a duck's eye view of some of these projects, and then let Mike speak about them in detail. Oh, I apologize. I hear there's no sound on the video. which I will say that really what you're missing is just some music, but we'll enjoy the visuals with no music. So with that, I will hand it over to Mike to discuss the projects in detail.
All right. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everybody, for having me. I always enjoy coming and talking with all the mayors and everybody else associated with MRCTI. Thank you for inviting us. Here we are, wrapping it up for you today. Hopefully we bring some fun to the end of the day, get you excited about some things that we're pretty excited about. Just to help kind of orient you a little bit, as Ellen said, we kind of looked at some different sections. I'm going to talk to you about that middle stretch, mid-river, riverine flooding section. So we're going to go through a couple places. One of the first ones is going to be what we're calling the Quad Cities Upper Mist region. To help orient everybody for the maps you're going to see moving forward, the potential pilot projects we've identified are the blue dots. Due to privacy concerns of either private landowners or just because we have a number of dots close to each other at this scale, we're just going to leave them as dots right now. We don't have names on them. The MRCTI member cities are the red stars. And then as Addie talked to us about and Ellen just spoke about, we also have the two degrees adapt identified levee districts on here. So as we move forward through these, this is what we're going to kind of help orient ourselves as we go. Next slide, please. So then the Quad Cities Upper Mist region, we've picked out two pilot projects. One of them, Green River WMA. It's on the Iowa side up there. Back in my home stomping grounds where I grew up, I actually worked at the Palisades State Park there during college, right across the river. I think Mayor Lane might have been on, maybe still with us. That's a pretty neat one we're going to talk about. That involves voluntary land protection and then some engineering and infrastructure on the backside. The other one we're going to talk about in this region is Wapello Bottoms WMA, their Rowdy Bush unit. But as you can see on the map here, we have a number of potential projects in this immediate cluster, including things like Lake Odessa, for example. Next slide, please. So the first one we'll talk about is the Green Island WMA. What we have identified here in the blue, this is the, I believe this is Sebula #1 Drainage and Levee District. It is, for those of you that might be familiar with the area, it's straight across the river from the old Savannah Army Depot, just upstream, just upriver of Savannah there. So the Iowa DNR owns and manages a very large portion of this as Green River WMA. Recently, Ducks Unlimited has partnered with them and the North American Conservation Act to work with willing landowners to enroll in the EWP program, to look at fee title purchase, and to consolidate the ownership within this drainage and levee district of about 4,000 acres, allowing the DNR and its partners to manage both flood water and the precipitation water, the storm water that would be captured within that drainage and levee district. Next slide, please. This is the Wapello Bottoms WMA. This is where the Iowa River just comes in and joins the Mississippi River. This is the Rowdy Bush unit. Within this, again, it's a partnership between Ducks Unlimited, the Iowa DNR, the NAWCA, as Ducks Unlimited calls it. If you've heard us talk about federal grants, you've heard us talk about NAWCA. Working on this with them to look at an area that was previous floodplain. It had been levied years ago, drained for agriculture, something that we hear very common, right, in the Mississippi River and its major tributaries. So this is going to be the first example I'll give here of a couple of how we're going to use our engineering solutions and natural infrastructure, green infrastructure, to help address flooding issues and the other concerns with it. So Ducks Unlimited, we are unique, and as a nonprofit conservation organization, we have engineers on staff. We have professional engineers that work for DU. A few of them here are joining us today, I believe, as honored guests. They work with myself, they work with our biologists and our other staff to work with our partners to look at ways to upgrade infrastructure, to change infrastructure, to look at what can we do to maximize not what it is now, but what it's going to be in the future. And that's a conversation we have with a lot of these public land managers is the flooding regime's changing. I mean, we've heard Addie give some fantastic data on it for the Mississippi. We know it's going to happen. The way these areas used to be managed isn't going to work in the future. How do we work with that moving forward? And how can we, if we can, use it to our advantage? So here, for example, we're going to insert 2 spillways as a for example. We're going to control where this flooding comes in, where it overtops and breaks this old levee. Then we're going to use that old levee to actually capture and hold that water. And we'll put what we have marked as WCS, that's a water control structure. That's going to allow managers to control when that water comes out. It gives them the ability to capture it, control where it's coming in to some degree, and then allow it to go out as the river goes back within bank below that major or minor, depending on your flooding impact stage. So really neat project, and just kind of one example that we work on at all scales. Next slide, please. So in this upper region, looking at the engineering and the 3 different levels of project status that Ellen had described, we have almost 14,000 acres right now. This includes things north of Burlington, north of Muscatine, north of the Quad Cities on the Rock River. We have some really cool stuff on the Rock we're excited to work on in the coming years here. And we've also identified, 5,600 acres of potential land protection. That is through working with private landowners, through floodplain programs such as EWP, through willing landowners they've had it being in the floodplain and they're ready to sell. So great projects. Like I said, just a sample. We're constantly identifying new projects, getting phone calls, and we always welcome phone calls. So if anybody has a project in mind, get a hold of Colin. He'll get a hold of us. But just the suite we have right now, we're looking at 15,000 to roughly 42,000 acre feet of storage per event. And as Addie said, the 1%, that's your most extreme. So that's everything within that kind of, I'm going to call it cushion. Ellen will talk to you more about the specific benefits later. She will use some that river rat bio speak, and she'll do a much better job of describing it. Next slide, please. So down here in the St. Louis Confluence region, we have Mayor Eastern here as one of our co-moderators today. Our office is right here in the Metro East. A number of MRCTI towns with the confluence of the Illinois and the Mississippi, and then you add in the Missouri coming into it. Obviously, as the last couple of years, 2019 in particular, showed us a lot of flooding. A lot of flooding happens in this area. But Ducks Unlimited, as you can see by just what we've identified, I'll say within the last year and a half, we've got a number of projects that we're pretty excited about to help with some of this and start addressing the issues. Next slide, please. So the pilot project I'm going to talk about is at Horseshoe Lake State Park. It's the lower end unit. Previously, we've talked about the Raspy Slough unit, which got wrapped up this summer, and I'll touch on that. But I also want to make a special mention, I kind of call it, about our DU-held floodplain conservation easements. The reason being, the pilot projects I'm going to highlight today, these are public lands projects. So on an open forum like this, we feel more comfortable, again, with private landowners. We want to remain sensitive to that. But this is a very unique situation. Where that circle is just up the confluence there in St. Charles County, Ducks Unlimited currently holds, many of them donated from willing landowners, roughly 30 to 35 maybe now, permanent easements on floodplain properties. We also have identified additional properties here with the blue dots that we're actively working with those landowners to secure conservation easements. This is a neat opportunity, an example that we have in other parts of the Mississippi River, where by willing, you know, we've heard us say now for yesterday and today, voluntary landowners. This is a here it is on the ground example of that. We've already protected thousands, tens of thousands of acres. We're hoping to protect tens of thousands of acres more, and that will provide in perpetuity floodplain wetland, floodplain storage. These areas are managed so that they are often dry and dewatered during the traditional, if you can call it that, higher events of the spring and summer and early fall. So I just want to mention that is that you're going to hear us talk about public projects a lot, but there is one that, yes, here's an example where we have private landowners that are very excited to work with us. So with that, we'll move on to the other one. Thank you. Horseshoe Lake State Park. This one is right here, wedged in between Pontoon Beach, Granite City, Madison, East St. Louis. Everybody over there right on the river. Last year, or earlier this year rather, I'm sorry, you heard us talk about the Rasky Slough project, which is actually the picture you see on the bottom here. If you could look a little further left, you see the St. Louis Arch and Granite City Steel. So this one just got finished. And as you can see where there's all that brown area that goes out to those green trees, that is now all brand new area that can store, hold, capture water that it couldn't before. So there's just another example of how we can use these to manage for habitat, manage for water quality, and, you know, a wetland at a time, we can start to increase that stormwater or that flood storage. So the one we're looking at right now is the lower end unit. It captures and holds stormwater from the Metro East and from the Cahokia Diversion Canal's emergency overflow. Ellen, if you would, I believe there's animation, just kind of help highlight to everybody. It comes in from two different directions. So Horseshoe Lake State Park is already acting as a very large stormwater retention basin, if you will. It's managed, the majority is managed by the state of Illinois, the Department of Natural Resources, but the control of the outflow is not. So it's already providing that benefit. So we're looking at the lower end unit here, which is separated by a causeway at the north end. When stormwater comes into the lake, if this lower unit area, which is roughly 284 acres, is low, it can come in that way. If the Cahokia Canal's overflow engages, it can come in from the south and fill it that direction. So it can hold possibly 86 million gallons. And you may be saying, well, if it's already doing that, Mike, what's the benefit of this pilot project? And that'd be a fantastic question. So I'm gonna hopefully give you, I won't say a fantastic, but hopefully give you a great answer. The current pumping system that the state has takes 30 days to get that water out of there after a storm event, 30 days. Now, when we do have the rainy part of the year, when they want the water out in the spring and the summer, 30 days to get it from full to empty. With the infrastructure upgrades, the pumping systems that we have designed, that we're in the process of identifying funding to do the project, we can reduce that to 5 days. So we can cut that pumping by 6. So if you think about that, how many storm events? I just had almost an inch here where I live on the Illinois side of the river last night, and that's all flowing this direction when it comes down off the bluff. So if you think about projects like that, that is an instance where we're helping increase that infrastructure capacity, that as the lake goes down after a flood event or a storm event rather, DNR can pump water out of this unit into the lake, and the lake's large enough, it'll settle out, but it's ready faster for that next storm event. So really a neat project. one we're pretty excited about. Next slide, please. So in the St. Louis Confluence region, again, 4,300 acres identified for engineering, over 15,000 potential protection acres through voluntary private landowners, through working with our existing public partners. And again, 12,000 to 58,000 acre feet per storage event. Next slide, please. The last area or region that I'll talk about in this middle river section is the Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri tri-state region. This is where we have the Ohio River coming in. We have things like the Big Muddy and the Kaskaskia draining all that beautiful black dirt, central Illinois farm ground, shoving that down your way. So there's a lot of flooding that happens here from different river systems, but it's all ending up in the Mississippi floodplain. So again, just to orient yourself, kind of Chester there at the upper end, down to New Madrid, Tiptonville, and projects scattered throughout, mostly on the Mississippi River, a few going up the Ohio there and the Cache, both very flashy systems, bringing water down from as far away as Pennsylvania. So next slide, please. So the one I'm going to focus on is up in the Shawnee National Forest, the Big Muddy River units. This is right where the Big Muddy River joins the Mississippi River. This is at the northern end of the Big Five Drainage and Levee District, as you can see on the map. And actually, for anybody from the area, as you can see behind me, this is actually the Big Five Drainage and Levee District as my backdrop today. That goes right down there to Cape and obviously on down to Cairo, Wickliffe, and further south. So next slide, please. So what we have is an ongoing partnership with the U.S. Forest Service to restore head-cut oxbows. So what that is the Big Muddy still meanders. It's levied in sections, but it still meanders for the most part between the bluff you see on your left and on the left side of the photo here, and off to the right there is the Big Muddy Levee, which separates out the Grand Tower Drainage and Levee District. Within that, it still acts as a natural floodplain. It still courses. It still has remnant oxbows. Well, with severity and flooding and changes, these oxbows, the waters has essentially ripped out of them faster than traditional flooding would have, and it has gully washed them out. So the river goes up and it floods, and the river goes down and the water drops out. What we are doing, and we've completed a couple, we have roughly 24 of these identified in just this section. We feel this is a type of project we can actually replicate in other parts of the Mississippi River system. What we've done, and down here on the bottom, is the actual engineering design for a project that just finished up earlier this week. And we're starting 2 more this coming week. And we have a bunch identified after that. So this area, it actually floods from 2 different directions. It'll take backwater flooding from the Mississippi. It'll take headwater flooding coming down out of Illinois, out of the Big Muddy. So in these 2 areas where the black dots are, as the Big Muddy River comes up from either direction, water will overflow controlled spillways, kind of like we saw on the first one, the Wapello Bottoms. As that happens, that whole dark gray area is going to fill up with water. Well, now, because we plugged those 2 little black dots, that water is not going to just rush right back out. It's going to stay right there. So this is passive. There's no infrastructure. There's no gates, pumps, bells, whistles. This is dirt and rock, but it serves the purpose. It will hold that water. It's going to naturally drain out of there. And because of the remote location of these, that's one of the reasons that they don't have things like gates on them. Not to mention, in this country, gates is one bad flood from a tree taking it out. But these are great projects. We've done a couple already. And they're already holding water. So really cool one. So great in the lower tri-state area, just over 7,000 acres, almost 13,000 acres identified of potential land acquisitions. So stuff we're really excited about, up to 60,000 acre feet of storage. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ellen.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm going to sort of wrap up by giving you guys a little bit of an overview of where this fits in with the work done by 2 Degrees Adapt on impacting the scale of flooding. So as you heard Addie say right before us, we're looking at a minimum of 10,000 acres to achieve that reduction in riverine flood by 2030. And using that really specific example of St. Genevieve to achieve that 10% reduction in the probability of levee overtopping, you're looking at 60,000 acre feet of floodwater storage. And so in comparison to the scale of projects that we've identified, in just these three regions, you're looking at nearly 20,000 acres in each the Quad Cities, St. Louis, and tri-state areas, and acre feet of storage equivalent to somewhere between 12,000 and close to 60,000 per geography. So we think with this suite of products, we're really getting to the scale of retaining and storing water and then allowing it out during lower river flow to actually start to do what Addie said, cut the top off of flood peaks. When we look at the cost of this as a natural infrastructure solution, Addie gave you a lot of great information about the potential other sources of revenue from carbon and water quality improvement. But when we look at the actual cost of these projects per acre foot of storage, on average, we're running about $2,500, but that's if we only consider one flood. These projects have a design lifetime of generally somewhere around 30 years, sometimes much, much longer. In the case of the easements Mike was discussing, those are perpetual. And if we think even one flood over that 30-year design lifetime, we're looking at something closer to $84 per acre foot of storage, which we think is beginning to be really reasonable, achievable cost and return on investment, particularly combined with the other types of natural assets that Addie discussed. So those co-benefits. Colin specifically asked us to address carbon sequestration as it relates to the nationally determined contribution. And so just for this suite of projects, we're looking at somewhere between 54 and 268,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent sequestered each year. And I do want to note that that's just sort of incidental. These projects were not planned. These are flood projects. So imagine what we can do if we start to plan a portfolio of both climate mitigation and flood adaptation projects. But this is a great co-benefit of these projects. It is another potential way to bring money to executing some of these projects through voluntary offsets. There's also potential to remove significant amounts of nitrogen. Of course, these projects remove sediment and phosphorus and other contaminants, but we know that nitrates in particular are the biggest concern for Mississippi River communities in the Gulf of Mexico. And we're looking at somewhere between 0.5 to close to 1 million kilograms of nitrogen removed by these floodplain projects annually. And I think the most immediate benefit is going to be seen through recreation. We heard a lot of great things earlier this afternoon about the value of multi-benefit projects that have this public recreation component. So sort of depending on the type of recreation and the area, we're looking at $16 to $140 or $1,400 annually per acre in recreation and other benefits associated with these projects. So we think those are all really exciting co-benefits. The other thing I wanted to discuss, and I think it's been brought up multiple times in the last 2 days, and Addie brought it up just before us, that we don't always want to just consider drought. The hydrology of the Mississippi River and many of the river systems draining into it have also become more drought prone. So we have extreme flood events and extreme drought. And I'm going to show you, this is an idealized figure from actually a modeling study on a different river system. But what I want to point out here is that we've really been, if you look at those purple lines, the purple dashed lines are a watershed that has wetlands. The purple solid line is a watershed that does not have wetlands. And what you see there is that there is a decrease in the peak flow. So that's the floods we've been discussing all day. When you put wetlands back into these systems, they capture that water and they decrease those peak flows during floods. The other thing that wetlands do that we haven't discussed quite as much is that when they capture that water, as Mike said, they slowly and naturally drain it back out through the subsurface system. So water percolates down through those wetlands, and it may take days or weeks or months, but then it makes its way back into the river system very slowly. And what that does is increase base flow. And base flow is what we really care about for things like navigation and transport. So I don't want to convey to you that wetlands are the end all be all of all of our problems on the Mississippi, but they're a great solution not only to decrease peak flow, but also to start to address the kind of drought conditions that cause us to have to blow out weirs in order to move barge traffic on the river. And so thinking about these as multi-purpose solutions, wetlands are really sort of the hydrologic regulator of the system by capturing that peak flow, slowly reintroducing base flow back into the river. And so it's another really exciting co-benefit that we might be able to achieve by reestablishing wetlands at scale. I want to kind of move on now to talk a little bit. Mike's talked a lot about projects that are specifically designed around flooding. We have two more projects, as I told you, that kind of have a slightly different focus than riverine flood. So the first one is in our co-chair, Mayor Strickland's geography on the West Memphis side of the river, right where the I-40 bridge comes across the river. So a fantastic location for people to be able to see these projects. One of the most trafficked river crossings in the country. This is the Big Rivers Park. So DU has been working with our collaborators at 10 Green and others to help finalize funding and acquisitions to develop this park outside the levees with West Memphis. This is already an area that floods frequently. It's not inside the levee. It's currently farmland that floods frequently. So there's not a big flood mitigation benefit, but there is a huge opportunity here for reforestation. So in partnership with Big River Park Conservancy and 10 Green Land Conservancy, we're looking at this as an opportunity to reforest about 1,500 acres of Mississippi River waterfront. It would also allow for, as discussion was had earlier, expansion of the Big River Trail system and other recreational opportunities right across the river from Memphis. And so when we look at the co-benefits of this project, we're looking at 2 to 8,000 metric tons of CO2 sequestered through the planting of those trees on former farmland, significant water quality improvement benefits. And this trail sees over 700,000 pedestrians and 200,000 cyclists annually. And so it's a great sort of high visibility project. Finally, I'm going to move down to our projects in Louisiana that are really more focused less around riverine floods and more around coastal surge, which is a topic I think is at the top of all of our minds. And so what we do in Louisiana very broadly is use the natural system and use small engineering modifications like cleaning out channels to reintroduce flow and rebuild land. So these projects often have a small physical footprint, but then they really expand in terms of their land building. So we're going to look at two specific projects today, the Moreau Foundation Terraces and the 40 Arpent Canal dredging. These are projects that are designed to prevent coastal erosion. You can see the terraces at the bottom of the screen on the left, and then clean out sediment clogged canals and reintroduce fresh water that rebuilds marshes. And so these are the types of projects we all do all up and down the shoreline of coastal Louisiana, but these are two that are currently ongoing. And we know that from just the about 1,600 acres of projects between these two, Moreau Foundation and 40 Arpent canals, we're looking at close to 8,000 metric tons annually of carbon sequestered, as well as a potential with the rest of the surrounding marshes to reduce storm surge by 15 to 30%. And those become really important for the cities that are outside of the levee system, but also for the integrity of the levee system. As much as we can reduce the power of storm and wave action, these marshes really act in concert with traditional gray infrastructure to make the whole system more robust. And so I guess we leave you with the message. I think throughout this talk, Mike and I have shown you a lot of imagery, engineering, design, machines working on the ground, DU's ready to get to work on these projects, where we're ready to talk about more projects. We'd like to see this get as big as it can and get our machines out working and see what we can do for your communities. And so again, we really, really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with the mayors and the cities. I encourage you to reach out to Colin and his team to discuss potential opportunities elsewhere along the river. We hope this is just the beginning of the projects that we're discussing with MRCTI and other partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Waldrop, Dr. Hubert, and Mr. Settle. I'm very excited about our new and innovative partnerships as we collectively, of collective mayors along the entire Mississippi have forged here. My city and many of my neighbors of the Metro East St. Louis region will benefit from several ready projects to increase the flood absorption, holding capacity of Horseshoe Lake, adjacent to the Mississippi River. This is very exciting, and I cannot wait to start some ribbon cutting projects here very, very soon.
I could not agree with you more, Mayor. And I want to see all these projects, not that they're all in my city, but I think because the entire region is going to be a benefit, we all benefit. So it was exciting. I'm not sure I understood all the science, but I understood enough to know that DU and Addie know what they're doing. So I really appreciate the partnership. I think we can move on to question and answers. As the case was with other sessions, guests can participate via the chat or electronically raise your hand to be recognized. I don't see any questions yet. I don't know if you do, Colin.
No, but I believe we may have some press or media on the line too. So we had a press conference today at 11 a.m. Central, and during that time, Addie and Karen Waldrop, Dr. Waldrop, did a brief overview of this project and ended up gaining a good amount of press interest. And they had some questions, but we asked them to please listen to this session. And so to answer a lot of their questions. And so I think that worked. I think Ellen and Mike did a fantastic job, and Addie on going into all of the detail that is around these projects. And I too can't wait to cut some ribbons, like Mayor Eastern said, some ribbons around these things.
Hey, Colin?
Maybe some big ribbons.
Hey, Colin?
Yes.
There is
ma'am.
a question in the question and answer. And the question is, would any of these projects be rolled into the Corps' NESP program once that begins?
Yeah.
I will hand that out to our experts. I think Mike, Ellen, probably be most positioned to answer that.
Yes, they some of them could be. I've been talking with Nest folks about projects in the Illinois River most recently through that program. There was just the RRAT meeting last week, and they did an update on Nest for that. So, short answer, yes. I think some of these projects, at least for the area I covered, could be covered through Nest or one of those similar programs.
All right, any other questions? if not, I really do want to thank 2 Degrees Adapt and Memphis's own Ducks Unlimited for this incredible presentation. And I think once the first project comes on, we'll all be so excited to see them and see how they work. So thank you. Now I'll turn it back to Colin at the WWT Tech Auditorium.
Thank you, Mayor, so much. Thank you, Mayor Eastern and the team at 2 Degrees Adapt and Ducks Unlimited, both teams putting all this together. It is very exciting. And, you know, was on calls with a lot of climate groups leading up to today's conversation in regards to COP26 in Glasgow. And I think, you know, we might be able to help some folks out. So when Senator John Kerry and his team go to Glasgow in a month and a half, they're going to have to show how the United States is planning to get to the NDC that President Biden has committed. And in order to convince other major carbon contributing countries of the planet, Brazil, India, China, that the United States is prepared to put its money where its mouth is and meet its own NDC, I think we've figured out a way to help them with that, certainly in the non-power sector. So we're planning to be in Glasgow too, if they actually have it, and it actually is a live event. Jury's still out on that for sure, but we plan to be there and talk about this, and for this to be part of the conversation because it's innovative. It's new, and it is a transformative approach. Mike and Ellen and Dr. Waldrop and Addie, I was asked the other day, why didn't you guys deploy these projects a long time ago? Why are you doing this now? What have you been waiting around for? and all of you are certainly, I welcome you to chime in on. I'll share with you how I answered the question, and I'd love for you all to chime in as well, and mayors too. This person was asking the question, and to be sincere though, I mean, they really wanted to know, why is this all coming together right now? Why didn't it come together back in 2015, or why didn't it come together after 1993 when we had huge floods? We've been having disasters for a while. Why didn't it happen after Katrina? Well, from just our vantage point within the association, a couple of things have not existed until now. So now we have the actual data at a systemic level that enables us to make the measurements and the projections and create the metrics around really being able to do this and show that it works empirically. Two, we didn't necessarily have all of the programs in place. So there have been new NRCS programs, USDA programs. There's new conservation programs out there. The states have also increased their own conservation programs that really make this possible and brought to bear. Four, the Corps of Engineers has been moving steadily more toward incorporating natural solutions and using natural infrastructure in their portfolio of solutions to put on the ground. And then five, and self-servingly, we didn't have all the cities together as an association working as one to kind of lift this within our cities and around our cities. Water moves through our cities, so having mayors bought in has also been transformative. So, I gave them 5 reasons from our point of view, and so I'd be interested in what Mike and Ellen, Dr. Waldrop, and Addie and the mayors would add to that if they would add anything else.
Yeah, one thing I would emphasize, one of the 5 that you mentioned, Colin, the sophistication of climate science in making good quality local predictions, right? So global climate models, general circulation models have existed for a long time, but the dynamic downscaling and other techniques to translate those into local predictions is something that has, I would say, dramatically improved in the last 5 years. So definitely 2 degrees adapt couldn't have existed 10 years ago as an analytical shop, or even 5 years ago. So the science has improved, and it's not only just us, it's, CMIP, NCAR, all these resources that are available now, to those who can use it, and the core's ability itself in doing hydrological modeling. So I think the climate science and hydrological science associated with climate science has just improved as a field over the last 5 years dramatically.
Very true. And also from the type of work that we do at Ducks Unlimited, these are the types of projects that we've been working on for years, but it takes partners like what we have with MRCTI and with 2 Degrees Adapt and everybody else that we've been hearing from the last 2 days to be able to really pull something like this and do something at scale that's going to have that measurable impact that we'll see that will certainly help. I think all the projects and things that we've done over the years will certainly help, but this increases that scale, having this partnership.
Yeah, to echo both Addie and Karen, I'd say the science has advanced. This group should keep your eye out, both the ASCE, who this group has met with previously. They're working on specific design guidance for natural infrastructure. That's totally new. I think in order for the engineers in our shop have been doing this their whole career, and they're very comfortable with it, but there's a very small subset of the engineering community. And so we have a lot of work, I think, to do to get everybody comfortable with this type of infrastructure, and to get the data they need to justify it. The Corps has been instrumental with the Engineering with Nature program in thinking about this and pushing these ideas forward. And so that side of the science, like, this will work, and here's the quantitative information that you need to show why it will work. And I also think just from being a conservation organization, and we're by far not the only organization that thinks this way, I don't think folks realized how conservation was funded, that it was like, for a long time, it was hunting licenses, fishing licenses. That's not enough for scale. And I think now you see just a groundswell of support for conservation with funding coming from all over. And Colin, to add to your 5 there, I think the number 6 would be the actual serious investment by private corporations in their own sustainability goals and in nature as an asset. And I think that is like a huge theme that we're seeing across the board in our communities and in conservation, is folks like Addie have been able to demonstrate the value, and people have really latched onto that as an asset that they want to protect. And I don't think 10 years ago we thought of nature as an asset, and now we're thinking a lot more about it.
Indeed. Any other input on any of that?
Mayor Constant has raised her hand, Colin.
Oh, didn't see that. Hi, Mayor.
Hey, Colin, thank you so much. I just, to speak to your point, I just wanted to add, at least as a mayor, speaking for myself, I just want to say thank you to the conservation community, to the engineering community, to the scientists, all the academics who have given us the critical information that we needed, so that as a mayor, as a leader of a community, we can use our voice to speak to that. I can remember when I got involved with MRCTI back in 2014, when it was a very young organization, and Colin said, well, why don't you invite the press, to the conference? Is any local media you'd like to invite? I'm like, Colin, if they hear me talking about global warming here in Southeast Louisiana, I'm gonna be unelected in 3 years. It was truly we're apples and oranges from where we were just in 2014 to what I can speak about today in my community. And it's because of the science, it's because of the information that has evolved, that has been publicly distributed through medias, many, many types of media. And it now allows us as leadership, and I'd love to hear what maybe other mayors think, but it allows us as local leaders to be able to speak about climate change as I am now recovering through yet another hurricane, right? And in the middle of flash floods today and yesterday and the rest of the week. So now people, at least I have their ear, I have their attention. And, you know, we just had to take it a baby bite at a time before we got to the point where we are. But I just want to say thank you to the academic world for continuing to engage in the scientific data that you have so that we can use that and people can now accept that as reality. And we can do what we need to do as leaders so that we can build sustainable cities for the future.
Indeed. And I recall that moment back in 2014, Mayor. And you certainly weren't alone back then either. We had quite a few members of our cohort that really had to talk about this stuff in a particular way at home in order to have the conversation. But yeah, it's very much changed now for the better. So that's progress. Okay, I'm not missing anybody else, right, Brant?
No, you're good, Colin.
Okay. Well, that concludes day 2 of our annual meeting. This will be the final day for us here in the Worldwide Technology Tech Auditorium. We will be moving to downtown St. Louis tomorrow, broadcasting from right next to the Arch Grounds. We're going to highlight with Mayor Tashara Jones some of the things to look forward to in terms of next year's annual meeting, 2022, which I've given up predicting, but I'm hopeful is a live and in-person event. And Mayor Jones will share with us some of the things that she's putting together as a preview and partnerships for that. Also tomorrow, more on the content side of things, we're going to have some very, very, very important guests. Joining us will be Congressman Benny Thompson from Mississippi and Congressman Troy Carter from Louisiana. Mr. Carter, as Mayor Constant and Mayor Broome and Mayor Tim and our other Southern Louisiana cities can attest to, he's been through a lot and recently and is still going through more impacts as we speak. But he has agreed to join us tomorrow because he considers this work that he's doing with MRCTI, and you're going to hear all about it, in Building Back Better, and the legislation that we are working on with him to be that important and that potentially transformative. What you're really going to hear is the whole federal component, the federal match, if you will, to everything that we've been talking about today on the private side. With Ducks Unlimited, 2 Degrees Adapt, and other partners, Cargill, Black & Veatch, One Architecture, all of these folks helping with this moment and this project. That's on the private side. What about the public side, other than the cities? The Congress and the federal government have a role to play here too, and we're going to go through all of that tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Central, starting with day 3 of our annual meeting. Again, I want to thank the entire crew here and all of the state and local education division folks at Worldwide Technology, Steve and Michelle. Thank you guys for all the tech and all of the support. And we will see you downtown St. Louis from the Mississippi River tomorrow, 9 a.m. Central. Thank you, everybody. Good night.